My sister's hand hit my upper arm hard enough to knock me half a step sideways. "Get out of the shot," Lila said. Her smile never left her face. "This one's for family only." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. The photographer had just waved me closer. My mother, Marlene, stood on Lila's left. My father, Victor, was beside her. Owen stood on the other side of his new wife, one hand resting lightly against the back of her wedding gown. Behind them, relatives were arranging themselves in uneven rows, while an assistant tried to keep a little boy from stepping on the bride's train. I had been moving toward an empty space beside my father when Lila blocked me. Not accidentally, not quietly. She put her palm against my arm and pushed. Several people saw it. My mother saw it too. She lowered her eyes and adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. My father looked toward the photographer as though he had suddenly become deeply interested in camera equipment. That was the moment I understood. This was not some mix-up over who belonged in which picture. Lila meant exactly what she had said. I looked at her. "All right." Her smile flickered. Maybe she expected me to argue. Maybe she expected me to ask what she meant by family, remind her that I was her only sister, or force our parents to choose sides in front of everyone. I did none of those things. I stepped back, smoothed the front of my dress, and looked at the photographer. "You can keep going." Then I turned toward the reception hall. Before I made it more than a few steps, a voice came from behind me. "Wait." I stopped. Owen's mother, Diane, had stepped away from the groom's side of the group. "Where's the bride's sister?" she asked. Nobody answered immediately. The photographer lowered his camera. Lila gave a tiny laugh. "She doesn't belong in this one." Diane's expression changed, not dramatically. She did not raise her voice. She simply stepped forward and looked directly at Lila. "Oh, she absolutely does." Then she turned toward her son. "Tell your bride why. If someone in your own family has ever decided that keeping the peace mattered more than telling the truth, you probably know why I still remember every second that followed. I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what Owen had found was only one page of a story my family had spent 15 years rewriting. And if you enjoy stories where the truth eventually catches up with the people hiding from it, subscribe to the channel and keep listening." Owen looked uncomfortable, and that detail mattered to me. He did not look triumphant. He did not look like a man who had uncovered some secret and was waiting for his chance to embarrass his new wife. If anything, he looked like he wanted everyone around us to disappear. His eyes settled on Lila. "When did you find the papers?" My sister's face changed so quickly that I almost missed it. The smile stayed, but everything behind it vanished. "What papers?" Owen shifted the tablet in his hand. "The ones about Caroline." My stomach tightened. I turned toward him. "What are you talking about?" Lila answered before he could. "They're old family records. He's misunderstanding them." Mom moved immediately. "Not here," she said. "Not today." I looked at her, then back at Owen. "Which records?" Nobody answered. That silence told me more than an answer would have. Guests had begun noticing. Not everyone, but enough. An aunt near the back of the photo group was staring openly. One of Owen's cousins whispered something to the woman beside him. The photographer shifted his weight and looked as though he would have preferred to be photographing a thunderstorm. Lila folded her arms. "This is exactly what she does." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. "What do I do?" I asked. "You make everything about you." I reminded her that I had been walking away, but she accused me of doing an innocent act. There were times in my life when I would have taken that bait. At 24, I would have answered every accusation. At 30, I might have tried to make her admit what she had just done. At 39, I knew something I had learned much too slowly. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. I looked at Owen instead. "If you found something with my name on it, we can talk privately. But I'm not doing this in front of your guests." Lila's mouth tightened. "Of course." "Now you get to look reasonable." I told her I was not trying to look like anything. Mom said my name in that warning tone she had used since I was a teenager. When I asked what she wanted, her eyes flicked toward the relatives around us. That was answer enough. She had not told Lila to stop when she pushed me. She had not objected when Lila said I was not family. She wanted me to stop now because people were watching. I looked back at the photographer and told him I was done with pictures and that he should continue without me. I did not tell him which photographs to take. It was not my wedding and not my contract. I simply removed myself from the situation and walked away. 10 months later, when I think about that afternoon, what surprises me most is how little of it actually surprised me. Lila had been excluding me all day. She had just been polite enough to do it in ways other people could pretend not to notice. Earlier that afternoon, I had sat through the ceremony several rows behind my parents. That had been my assigned seat. Not beside Mom and Dad, and not with the people introduced as immediate family. I sat with relatives I saw once or twice a year. Of course I noticed. I simply decided I was not going to turn a seating chart into a family summit on my sister's wedding day. Lila had not asked me to be a bridesmaid, which was fine. We had not been close for years, and pretending otherwise would have been ridiculous. She had not asked me to help her dress, and that was fine too. She had barely spoken to me before the ceremony except to say, "You made it," in the same cheerful tone she used with distant cousins. I could live with all of that because I had spent years learning the difference between being excluded and volunteering to humiliate yourself by demanding admission. So I attended the ceremony, congratulated her afterward, told Owen he looked happy, and spoke to relatives. I did not ask why my seat was where it was. I did not ask why Mom had spent most of the morning with Lila, but had not called me once. I did not ask why every family ritual seemed to have been designed with just enough room for everyone except me. I had told myself the same thing repeatedly. It was her wedding. Let her have the day she wanted. There had been one detail I barely registered at the time. Just before the formal pictures started, the photographer had been comparing a printed shot list with something on the tablet Owen and Lila had been using throughout the wedding planning. I heard him say, "I think I have an older version." Lila was across the room speaking with someone from the venue. Owen took the tablet from him. That was all I saw. A groom helping a photographer find the right file. Nothing about it seemed important. Less than 10 minutes later, my sister pushed me out of a photograph, and Owen asked her when she had found papers about me. I did not know those two moments were connected until he found me after I left the photo area. I had gone down a quieter hallway near the coat check. I was not crying. I was angry enough that crying would have felt almost insulting. I was deciding whether to stay for dinner. Part of me wanted to leave immediately. Another part hated the idea of giving Lila a second story to tell. Caroline stormed out of my wedding. Caroline could not let me have one day. Caroline caused a scene. It is exhausting when you know someone well enough to predict the version of your behavior they will repeat later. I was still standing there when Owen approached. Diane came with him, but stopped several feet away. "Caroline," Owen said. I turned toward him. He held the tablet against his chest and told me that if I wanted to leave, he understood. I said that sounded like a very polite way of telling me to leave, but he insisted it was not. When I asked what he needed, he glanced back toward the reception and said he needed an answer. Then he asked, "Did your parents ask you to take care of Lila?" The question landed strangely, not because I did not understand it, but because I understood it too well. I told him yes, then immediately added that the sentence needed context. Owen stared at me. Lila told me something different. I told him I had assumed she had. When he asked what that meant, I reminded him that he had just watched her tell me I was not family. He said that was not what he meant. I knew that. I also knew that whatever he had discovered, neither of us yet knew exactly how much of our histories had been presented differently to the other. Owen rubbed his thumb along the edge of the tablet and explained what had happened. The photographer had two versions of the family photo list. One was printed. The other was supposed to be the final digital version Lila had updated during the weeks before the wedding. The photographer asked Owen to find a file called Family Photos Final. Owen opened the Files app on the same tablet he and Lila had been using for wedding planning and searched the word family. The photo list appeared, but so did another search result, an older PDF whose preview showed my name, Caroline Reed. There was also enough visible text for Owen to see that it concerned a temporary relative care placement. He opened one page. On it were two names he recognized immediately: Marlene Reed and Victor Reed, my parents. Their signatures were at the bottom. Owen turned the tablet toward me. I looked at a document I had not seen in years. The page was a scan, but I recognized it. I recognized Dad's signature first because his V always leaned too far to the right. Mom's was smaller and cleaner. My own name appeared farther down the page. For a moment, the hallway around me seemed to flatten. I was 24 again, with a school bag on my apartment floor, a 16-year-old refusing to eat dinner because she hated me, my mother telling me everything would be temporary, and my father saying he just needed time. Then I was 39 again, standing outside my sister's wedding reception while her new husband held a scan of paperwork that had begun the worst 14 months of both our lives. Owen pointed at the signatures. "This says they agreed to place her with you." I told him yes. He said Lila had told him I pushed my way into the situation. I told him I had not. When he said she claimed I wanted control, I admitted that part was more complicated. He looked confused, so I handed the tablet back. One page can tell you who signed something. It can tell you what arrangement existed. It cannot tell you what living with me was like. Diane spoke for the first time and said that was exactly what she had told him. When he showed her the page, she had warned him not to decide an entire childhood from one document. I thanked her. Diane nodded toward the photo area and said, "But what I saw out there wasn't a document." I knew what she meant. She had watched Lila put her hand against my arm and tell me I did not belong in a family picture. Owen asked whether I knew Lila had these files. I said no. He asked whether I had sent them to her or to him. Again, no. He studied my face, and I could see the question he was trying not to ask. Was I lying? I did not blame him. He had been married for a matter of hours. I was the sister his wife had described for years as controlling, bitter, and impossible to trust. He should not have believed me simply because I sounded calm, so I told him not to take my word for anything. If he wanted to know what had happened, he should verify it. Diane's expression changed slightly at that. Owen looked down at the tablet and reminded me that Lila had said he was misunderstanding old records. I told him maybe he was. He asked how that could be true when I had just confirmed my parents asked me to take care of her. I told him I did not yet know what he was misunderstanding because I did not know what else Lila had told him. I picked up my purse from the bench beside me and said I was leaving. Owen told me I did not have to, but I knew I did. When he asked whether it was because of Lila, I told him it was because I was angry, and I did not make good decisions when people expected me to prove I was not angry. Diane almost smiled, but I did not. I told Owen I was not asking him to confront Lila that night, and I was not asking him to believe me. If he asked me a factual question about something I had done, I would answer it. What happened between him and his wife was not mine to manage. That was something I meant, and it would become important later. At the time, I only wanted to get out of that building without saying something I could not take back. I made it almost to the coat check before Mom appeared. She came quickly enough that I knew she had been looking for me. When she called my name, I kept reaching for my wrap and told her I was leaving quietly, so she should be thrilled. She told me I needed to stop this. I turned and asked what exactly I was supposed to stop. Her eyes flashed toward the reception doors. Whatever Owen thinks he found, you do not need to turn it into some investigation tonight. The word investigation caught my attention. I told her I had not shown him anything. She said my name again, but I cut her off. I had never seen that scan until 5 minutes ago. I didn't send it to him. I didn't send it to Lila. I didn't know it existed on their tablet. Mom's face went very still. Then she asked the question that changed everything. How much did he see? My hand stopped on the fabric of my wrap. There are questions people ask when they are confused. What document? Whose paperwork? What are you talking about? My mother asked none of those things. She asked how much. I looked at her carefully and told her he had seen 1 page. Her shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. It was relief, not confusion, and I felt something cold settle beneath my ribs. I asked what she had thought he saw. Mom's mouth tightened. "This is Lila's wedding." I told her that was not what I had asked. She said my sister had waited a long time for that day. I asked again what she thought Owen had seen. Mom reached toward my arm, but I stepped back before she could touch me. She let her hand fall and said, "Please, for once, don't make this bigger than it has to be." I stared at the woman who had just watched her younger daughter shove me out of a family photograph without saying a word. She had not followed me to apologize. She had not asked whether I was hurt. She had not asked why Owen had a document with her signature on it. She wanted to know how much he had seen. I picked up my wrap and asked, "How did you know what he saw?" Mom looked toward the reception doors again. She never answered me. I left before dinner. For the first few miles, I told myself the same things I had been telling myself for years. Let it go. It was old. Lila had been 16. Our parents had gone through a terrible period and come out the other side. Families remembered difficult years differently, and I had made mistakes too. All of those things were true, but another thing was true now. My mother had been afraid of a piece of paper she supposedly believed meant nothing. As I drove away from my sister's wedding that night, I began to understand that this had never really been about a photograph. The photograph was simply the first place they drew the boundary where everyone else could see it. 15 years before Lila pushed me out of her wedding photos, I was 24 years old and sitting at my desk when the high school called. The woman on the phone asked if I could come immediately. She would not explain much beyond saying Lila was safe and that someone needed to pick her up. I remember grabbing my purse and leaving so fast that I forgot the coffee sitting beside my computer. By the time I reached the school, I already knew enough about what was happening with our parents to understand that this was not going to be a normal ride home. What I did not understand was how completely the next 14 months would change the way my sister remembered me. Lila was sitting in the counseling office with her backpack between her shoes when I arrived. She looked 16 in the worst possible way, old enough to understand that adults were hiding things from her, and young enough to believe that if she demanded the truth loudly enough, somebody would finally give it to her. The moment she saw me, her expression hardened. "Where's Mom?" she asked. I closed the door behind me and sat in the chair beside her. "She can't come today." Lila immediately stood. "Then Dad can get me." I told her he could not come either. She stared at me for several seconds before asking the question I had been dreading. "So why are you here?" I told her she was going home with me for a while. She asked how long. I could have lied and said a few days. I could have offered the kind of reassuring answer adults give children when they are frightened, and nobody has any idea what is going to happen. Instead, I told her the truth. "I don't know." She hated that answer. She wanted dates, explanations, somebody to blame, and most of all, she wanted a vote. I could not give her any of those things. Our parents were dealing with a prescription drug problem that had stopped being something the family could pretend was temporary. There were appointments, treatment requirements, safety conditions, and adults outside our family now asking questions that Mom and Dad could no longer avoid. A temporary kinship arrangement had been approved, so Lila could stay with me instead of being placed somewhere unfamiliar while our parents worked through the plan. None of that mattered to a 16-year-old sitting in a school office with a backpack at her feet. What mattered to Lila was that everybody else seemed to know where she would sleep that night except her. "Did anybody ask me?" she demanded. I said no, because nobody had. Years later, I understood that was the first injury she carried out of that room, and it had nothing to do with whether the decision itself was necessary. My apartment had 1 bedroom and a small second room that I had been using for storage. That first evening, I dragged boxes into my bedroom and made the smaller room hers. I bought the cereal she liked, the shampoo she used at home, and a set of cheap sheets because I knew she hated mine. I also wrote down rules. School every day unless she was sick, home by the agreed curfew. If plans changed, she called me. She did not get into cars with adults I had never met, and she did not disappear for hours because she was angry. Lila stood in the kitchen reading the page as though I had handed her prison regulations. Mom doesn't make me do half of this. I answered, Mom isn't responsible for you here, I am. That was probably the wrong thing to say. It was logically true. And at 24, I often confused logical truth with the right thing to say. The first week was exhausting in ordinary ways that nobody writes sentimental stories about. Lila left wet towels on the bathroom floor. I had to wake her 3 times for school. She complained that there was nothing to eat while standing in front of a refrigerator I had filled specifically for her. I changed my work schedule, canceled plans, and learned very quickly that caring for someone did not automatically make you patient with them. There were nights when I sat on the edge of my bed listening to music through the wall and thought, I cannot do 14 days of this, let alone however long they expect me to. Then morning came and I packed an extra sandwich because she always said she was not hungry before school and came home starving. I did not see myself as noble. Most days I felt like a 24-year-old who had been handed responsibility I did not know how to carry and was determined not to drop it in public. Mom called whenever she could. At first, those conversations made Lila hopeful. After every call, she would ask if she could go home that weekend, then next weekend, then just for one night. I could not approve things that were outside the safety plan, and saying no made me the person standing physically between Lila and the home she wanted. One evening, Mom called me after speaking with her. Lila had gone into her room and slammed the door because I would not let her change an agreed visit arrangement. Mom sighed and said, Just try to make things feel normal for her. I remember staring at the sink full of dishes while she said it. Nothing is normal, I answered. Mom was quiet before saying, If she needs to be mad at somebody right now, let her be mad at you. She needs to believe her father and I are going to get through this. The request made something in me harden immediately. She can hate my rules, I told Mom. I'm not lying to her for you. Mom said that was not what she meant. But it was close enough that I understood the difference even then. I would take responsibility for decisions I actually made. I would not tell Lila that her parents were fine when they were not, or pretend I had invented restrictions because Mom needed to remain the good parent in her daughter's mind. I wish I could say that boundary kept everything clean. It did not. People do not need your permission to make you the villain. Sometimes they only need you to be the person who keeps saying no while everyone else promises someday. My biggest mistake was that once I realized I could not control the situation around us, I started controlling the things I could. Lila skipped an afternoon class one day and went to a friend's house without telling me. The school called because she had missed her last 2 periods. I found her 3 hours later sitting on somebody's back porch drinking soda and acting as though I had embarrassed her by showing up. I was frightened, but fear came out of me as efficiency. I drove her home, took her phone for several days, tightened her curfew, and made her give me addresses before she went anywhere. Lila stood in my kitchen with her fists clenched. You like this? I asked what she meant. Having somebody you can control. I told her that if I liked controlling her, I had chosen a very strange way to entertain myself. She did not laugh. She said, You finally get to be in charge of everybody. I dismissed it because I thought the accusation was ridiculous. Looking back, that was one of the places where I was wrong. I did not enjoy having power over Lila, but I had started trusting rules more than conversation. Rules were measurable. Curfew was either 10 o'clock or it was not. School attendance could be checked. A phone could be taken away. Feelings were messier, and I was not good at sitting with messy things when there was a practical problem waiting to be solved. Lila needed safety, but she also needed somebody to acknowledge that losing control over your own life at 16 was terrifying. Instead, I kept giving her solutions. When she said she felt trapped, I explained why the restrictions existed. When she said she missed Mom, I reminded her of the next scheduled contact. When she said she hated living with me, I told her the arrangement was temporary. I was answering every statement except the one underneath them. The worst breach between us happened several months into the arrangement. I had noticed Lila becoming secretive about one particular person. She would turn her phone face down when I walked into the room, disappear outside to take calls, and give me vague answers about where she had been. At first I assumed it was another teenager. Then I heard enough to realize the man was older than I had thought. Not 20 years older, not some stranger lurking outside a school, but old enough that I immediately understood why she had been hiding his age from me. I asked her directly who he was. She told me he was a friend. I asked how old he was. She said that was none of my business. That should have been the moment I slowed down, involved the appropriate adults, and found a way to talk to her without turning it into another contest of authority. Instead, I checked her private messages. I found enough to know I had been right to worry. The man was pushing for private meetings, encouraging her not to tell me, and treating the fact that she was 16 as an inconvenience rather than a boundary. I stopped the meeting she had planned and made sure the situation went no further. I would still stop that meeting today. What I would not do today is pretend that being right about the danger made every method I used right. Lila discovered that I had gone through her private messages before I had decided how to tell her. She came into the kitchen holding her phone, shaking with rage. "You read everything?" she demanded. I said I had read enough. That was private. I told her privacy did not include hiding an unsafe situation from the person responsible for her. She screamed that I was not responsible for her because I was not her mother. That was when I said the sentence she would remember for years. I was tired, angry, and certain that because I was doing the difficult thing, I had earned the right to say the cruel thing. "I know I'm not your mother," I said. "I'm the one who stayed." Lila stopped shouting. The silence afterward was worse than anything she could have yelled at me. I knew almost immediately that I had hit exactly where she was weakest. Her parents were gone because they were struggling, not because they had stopped loving her, and I had taken the most frightening fact in her life and used it to win an argument. I wanted to take the sentence back the second it left my mouth. Instead, I stood there for another few seconds, because pride can make a person protect a terrible sentence simply because admitting regret feels like surrender. I apologized later that night. Lila told me to get out of her room. I said the thing about our parents had been cruel and I should never have said it. She asked whether I regretted reading her messages too. I told her I regretted hurting her, but that I would still intervene if I believed she was in danger. She laughed without humor. "So you're sorry, but you'd do everything again." I did not have a good answer, because there were two different questions tangled together, and I was still young enough to think I had to choose one truth. I had protected her from someone who should not have been pursuing her. I had also damaged her trust. Both were true, but it took me years to become comfortable admitting that. The sentence that caused even more damage came later, and unlike the first one, I did not even know Lila had heard it. Our parents had made progress, and every sign of improvement made Lila ask the same question. When could she go home? I wanted the arrangement to end too. By then, I missed having an apartment that felt like mine. I missed making decisions that affected only me, and I was tired of being the first person everyone called when something went wrong. But wanting Lila home was not the same as pretending the timing was mine to decide. There were still conditions in the family services plan, and the people supervising it had made clear that reunification had to happen in a way that would hold. One afternoon I was on the phone discussing a proposed return. I remember standing near the kitchen doorway while Lila was supposed to be in her room. "No," I said. "She can't go home yet." There was a pause while the person on the other end answered. I continued. "If she goes back before the plan is completed and it fails, she could end up moved somewhere none of us control. I'm not taking that risk just to make everybody feel better for a week." I thought Lila was down the hall. What I did not know was that she had come far enough into the kitchen to hear the first sentence. She heard me say she could not go home, saw me turn away, and walked back to her room before I said why. Later that evening, she barely spoke to me. I assumed she was angry because another return date had not worked out. I did not know she had just collected another piece of evidence for a story that would eventually explain me to her. Years later, whenever the subject of those 14 months came up, Lila had one line she returned to more than any other. "You were the one who kept me from going home." For a long time, I believed I understood where that sentence came from. I thought she remembered the rules, the phone, the messages I read, the things I had said badly, and that one phone conversation she had heard incompletely. I could understand how a frightened 16-year-old might build a story from those pieces, and because some of her anger was deserved, I stopped trying to correct every version of it. What I did not know until after her wedding was that Lila's misunderstanding had not survived for 15 years by accident. Somewhere along the way, someone had helped turn a teenager's incomplete memory into our family's official history. The morning after Lila's wedding, I woke up to 37 unread messages in our family group chat. I stared at the number for a few seconds before opening it, already knowing nobody would be asking whether I was all right. My aunt had written that things had gotten a little uncomfortable after the photos. One cousin said everyone had been emotional and suggested we give Lila some grace because weddings were stressful. Mom had posted that she hoped we could all remember how much Lila had been looking forward to her day and not let one difficult moment become the thing everyone remembered. Someone else wrote, "Please don't punish her for losing her temper." I scrolled through the entire thread twice. Not one person wrote that Lila had pushed me out of the picture. Not one person repeated what she had actually said. By breakfast, the incident had already been softened from a deliberate humiliation into a bride having an emotional moment. 15 years earlier, I would have answered every message. I would have reminded them exactly who touched whom, who said what, who walked away, and who followed. That morning, I did something different. I took screenshots, saved them in a folder with the date, and muted the conversation. I was not building a case against my family. I was trying to stop myself from being pulled into 20 simultaneous arguments where everyone would remember their own version by dinner. There is a strange thing that happens in families where conflict has been avoided for too long. The first person who becomes precise starts looking aggressive, saying, "This is exactly what happened," gets treated as more hostile than saying something vague enough for everyone to feel innocent. I had spent too much of my adult life learning that lesson the hard way. Owen called shortly after 9. His voice was quiet, and I could tell immediately he had not slept much. He apologized for calling so early and asked whether it was still all right to ask me questions about the paperwork. I told him the boundary I had given him the night before had not changed. I would answer factual questions about myself. I would not tell him what to think about his wife, and I would not tell him what decisions to make in a marriage that had been less than a day old when all of this started. There was a pause before he asked, "Did your parents actually ask you to take care of Lila?" I told him yes. He asked whether I had volunteered first, pressured them, or gone to family services behind their backs. "No," I said. "They asked me because they needed somewhere stable for her to stay while they completed the plan." Owen was silent long enough that I knew my answer had landed somewhere painful. Finally, he said, "Lila told me you basically took her away from them." I closed my eyes. I had heard versions of that sentence before, but hearing it from the man she had just married gave it a different weight. "That isn't what happened," I said. Owen asked whether Lila had simply remembered it differently. I told him that was possible, especially at 16. Then I added something I knew he was not expecting. "But if you want to know exactly what the arrangement was, don't rely on my memory either." He asked what I meant. I told him I still had some of the paperwork from that year. I had not looked at most of it in more than a decade. But if I was going to correct a factual claim, I wanted the document in front of me before I did it. The box was in the back of my storage closet behind tax records. Old apartment leases and a stack of things I had kept because I was always certain I would organize them someday. The cardboard had softened at the corners. When I carried it to the dining table, dust left a gray streak across my sleeve. I opened the lid and immediately recognized the filing system I had used at 24. Blue folders for work, green for bills, yellow for anything involving Lila. I had always organized things when I was scared. Other people cried, prayed, or called friends. I made labels. It was one of the habits that had helped me survive that year, and one of the habits that made Lila feel as if her whole life had become a project I was managing. The first folder contained school attendance notices, emergency contact forms, and appointment reminders. Beneath those, I found the page Owen had seen. It was clearer than the scan on his tablet. Mom's signature, Dad's signature, My name listed as the approved relative caregiver. The language was dry and administrative, which somehow made it more powerful. Nobody had written that Caroline rescued anyone. Nobody had written that my parents were monsters. It simply recorded that during a family crisis, they had agreed to a temporary kinship care arrangement in which Lila would live with me while they worked through the conditions required for her safe return home. I read the page twice, then called Owen back. I have it, I told him. The original copy I kept. Does it say what I thought it said? It says they agreed to the arrangement. So she was wrong. About that specific claim, yes. He sounded frustrated. Why do you keep qualifying everything? Because the paperwork proves one thing. It doesn't prove every argument we had. It doesn't prove I was easy to live with. It doesn't prove Lila wasn't miserable. Owen exhaled. You're making this harder, Caroline. No. I'm trying not to make it simpler than it was. That mattered to me because I had no interest in replacing Lila's distorted story with one where I was flawless. I had already admitted to myself what I had done badly. I had read private messages. I had responded to fear by tightening rules. I had said something cruel because I wanted to win an argument with a 16-year-old. If Owen was going to understand what had happened, he needed the truth, not a more flattering mythology with my name in the center. I kept going through the box after we hung up. The second important document was not dramatic enough to look like evidence in a movie. It was a caregiver copy of a family services summary, only a few pages long, with most of the language focused on practical responsibilities and conditions. I remembered signing it, although I had forgotten the exact wording. The important part was clear. The goal was reunification. Lila was supposed to return to our parents when the required treatment and safety conditions had been completed and approved. My role was temporary. Near the bottom was my acknowledgement that I understood the plan and would support reunification when those conditions were met. I sat back in my chair and stared at my 24-year-old signature. That page brought back a memory I had not thought about in years. There had been a month when Dad missed an appointment, and Mom wanted everyone to pretend it was a scheduling error. I had called him myself and told him that if he wanted Lila home, he needed to stop treating every requirement like an insult. He had accused me of acting superior. I told him I did not care whether he liked me. I wanted my sister back in her own home and my life back in my own hands. That part had disappeared entirely from the family story. Over the years, Caroline enforced the plan had somehow turned into Caroline wanted to keep Lila. The document in front of me did not prove what I felt. It proved what the plan actually said and what I had agreed to do. I made copies of the relevant pages and covered information that had nothing to do with the question Owen was asking. I was not going to send around private treatment details from 15 years earlier simply because my family had decided to fight over the past. I sent Owen only what showed the arrangement, my parents' agreement, and the stated reunification goal. Then I texted him one sentence. These answer the two factual questions we discussed. They do not answer what living with me felt like for Lila. He called again almost immediately, but this time his voice was more unsettled than surprised. I talked to her, he said. I waited. She says the documents don't show what you were like. They don't. She says you controlled everything. Her phone, where she went, when she could see your parents. Some of that is true. Another silence. You're agreeing with her? I'm agreeing with facts. I told Owen about the curfew, taking the phone, checking messages, and the fight over the older man. I told him I had enforced contact rules connected to the family plan and that I had sometimes spoken as though every restriction came from me because I was the person standing in front of Lila delivering the answer. I also told him I had become too controlling when I was scared. If she says living with me sometimes felt like being trapped, I believe she felt that way, I said. If she says I decided to take her from our parents because I wanted control over her, that is not what happened. Owen sounded almost relieved to hear something about me that matched what Lila had told him. I understood why. Nobody wants to discover the person they married has invented an entire past. A partial overlap gave him somewhere comfortable to stand. So, maybe that's what she means, he said. Maybe when she says you took her, she means emotionally, like you took over. I could have pushed harder. Instead, I told him that was something he would have to ask Lila. Words mattered. If someone said, "My sister was too controlling when I lived with her," I could answer for the choices I had made. If someone said, "My sister took me away from my parents because she wanted to keep me," that described an event that had not occurred. Feelings could explain why the sentences became tangled. They could not make them identical. By early afternoon, Mom called. Dad was with her. I knew that because I could hear the television in the background and the faint clink of the mug he always carried from room to room. Mom did not ask whether I had slept or why Owen had called me. She began with, "I heard you've been sending documents around." I told her I had sent Owen 2 redacted pages that involved my own role because he had asked me a factual question. "You see," she said, "this is exactly what I was afraid of. Now you're turning something from 15 years ago into evidence against your sister." I reminded her that I had not brought the paperwork to the wedding and had not even known Lila possessed a scan. Mom said that was beside the point. Apparently the point was that once a contradiction existed, I had a responsibility not to verify it too clearly. "We were under enormous pressure back then," Mom said. "You don't remember what it was like for us. I remember more than I want to. You were always the one pushing things, pushing appointments, pushing rules, pushing everyone to do things your way." "That isn't the question." "What question? Did you and Dad ask me to take Lila?" Mom sighed. "It was not as simple as somebody asking and somebody agreeing. It's a yes or no question. Life isn't a yes or no question, Caroline." "No, but whether you asked me is." Dad finally spoke from somewhere near the phone. "Everybody remembers that time differently." I stared through my kitchen window while he said it. "Dad, I'm not asking how you remember feeling." "Did you ask me to take her?" "Nothing." I could hear Mom moving around. Then she said, "Family services was involved. We were trying to do what they wanted. You were available." "That still isn't an answer. Why are you interrogating us?" "Because for 15 years people have said I pushed my way in, and yesterday Owen found paperwork with your signatures on it." Mom's voice sharpened. "There you go again, making paperwork more important than people." "No, I'm making the question smaller." That was something I had learned at work long before I understood how useful it could be in a family. When people wanted to avoid accountability, they expanded the question until nobody could answer anything. Suddenly, a signature became trauma, context, love, recovery, intentions, and whether somebody had been a good mother overall. I was not asking whether Mom loved Lila. I was not asking whether Dad had suffered. I was asking whether they had asked me to become the relative caregiver during that period. Dad finally said, "We needed help." Mom cut in immediately. "Victor." He went quiet. I almost laughed, but the sound never came. "That's closer." Mom told me not to twist his words. I told her I did not need to twist anything because I had the signed page in front of me. She accused me of enjoying this. That one hurt more than I expected. "You think I enjoy going through a box from the worst year of my 20s? I asked. "You think I wanted your new son-in-law calling me the morning after his wedding, asking whether his wife told him the truth about me? You could have told him it was complicated and left it there." "It is complicated." "Then why send him anything?" "Because complicated does not mean unknowable." Dad asked us both to calm down. Mom said I had always needed to be right. I told her I had been wrong about plenty of things, and if she wanted a list, I could give her one. That did not change whose signatures were on the placement page. She said I was proving Lila's point by refusing to let anything go. I asked what exactly I was supposed to let go. The push at the wedding, the story Owen had been told, or the fact that they still could not answer a question whose answer was recorded in ink. Mom ended the call a few minutes later by saying she would not participate in a trial about the past. Afterward, I sat at the dining table with the 2 documents in front of me and understood something I had missed for years. Nobody in my family had to invent an outrageous lie all at once. They only had to change the language a little each time. "We asked Caroline for help," became Caroline took over. Lila lived with Caroline under a temporary family plan, became Caroline kept Lila from us. Caroline enforced restrictions while we worked toward reunification, became Caroline liked having control. Each sentence contained enough of the one before it to feel familiar. After 15 years, the final version could sound true, simply because everyone had heard it more often than the original. Owen called once more that evening. He said Lila was angry that I had sent him paperwork and insisted I was trying to make her doubt her own childhood. I told him I was not asking anyone to doubt how she felt. She can say I was controlling, I said. She can say she hated living with me. She can say I hurt her. I'll answer for those things. Owen asked what I would not accept. I won't accept an event that didn't happen because it makes the feelings easier to explain. He was quiet, then admitted he did not know what to do with that. I told him he did not need to decide anything that night. The man had been married for one day. Whatever happened next needed to be his choice, not mine. Before putting the box away, I went through the remaining folders once more. Most contained nothing useful: receipts, school papers, copies of forms, and old notes in my handwriting. Near the bottom was a smaller envelope I did not remember. My name was written across the front in Mom's handwriting, along with the month and year from the middle of the period when Lila lived with me. I turned it over in my hands, trying to remember what was inside. The flap had been opened years ago, but nothing about the envelope brought the memory back. After everything I had read that day, I was tired of the past arriving one page at a time, so I set it beside the box instead of opening it. At the time, I thought the signed placement paper and the reunification summary had answered the most important questions. They proved my parents had agreed to the arrangement, and that keeping Lila permanently had never been the goal. What I did not understand yet was that those papers only showed what my family had agreed to 15 years earlier. The envelope on my table was going to show me something harder to explain away: what my mother herself believed about me while it was actually happening. The envelope with my mother's handwriting sat on my kitchen table for nearly an hour before I opened it. I had found it tucked behind the placement papers and the reunification summary, yellowed slightly at the edges, my name written across the front in the narrow, careful handwriting Mom had used for grocery lists and birthday cards when I was younger. I should have torn it open immediately. Instead, I made coffee I did not want, walked from the kitchen to the living room twice, and finally left the envelope where it was. Before I read another word written 15 years ago, there was something I needed to admit to myself about the story Lila had been telling. My sister had lied about how she came to live with me, but she had not lied about everything that happened once she got there. The easiest version of my story would have been the one where I was 24, brave and selfless, and my 16-year-old sister punished me for saving her. It would also have been dishonest. I had protected Lila during those 14 months, but sometimes I had protected her badly. The incident I regretted most involved the older man she had been hiding from me. I had noticed the change before I knew what caused it. She started carrying her phone everywhere, even into the bathroom. She smiled at messages and then erased the expression from her face when I walked into the room. Twice she claimed she was going to a friend's house and came home later than we had agreed. When I asked who she was talking to, she gave me the name of a boy from school. Something about the way she answered made me suspicious, so instead of doing the patient thing and continuing the conversation, I waited until she was in the shower and checked the messages she had left open on her phone. The person messaging her was not a boy from school. He was an adult several years older than Lila, old enough to know exactly why he kept telling her not to mention him to me. Most of the messages were not explicit, which somehow made them worse. He was careful. He told her she was mature. He said I treated her like a child because I was jealous of how independent she was. He suggested meeting somewhere I would not know about. He told her that if I asked questions, she should say she was with one of her girlfriends. Reading those messages made every protective instinct in me come alive at once. It also made me angry, and anger was never my best state for making delicate decisions. I copied down what I needed, stopped the meeting they had planned, involved the appropriate adults, and made sure he did not get another private opportunity with her. Those were decisions I could still defend. What I could not defend was the way I treated Lila afterward, as though being right about the danger gave me ownership of every private corner of her life. She discovered I had read the messages before I had decided how to tell her. I remembered her standing in my kitchen gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles went pale. "You went through everything." I told her I had read enough to know she was putting herself in danger. "That was mine," she said. "You had no right." Instead of acknowledging that she was right about the invasion, even if I was right about the risk, I answered like a person trying to win. I told her I was responsible for keeping her safe and that privacy did not mean she could hide something dangerous from me. Lila said, "You love having an excuse to control me." I denied it because I did not enjoy controlling her. But I understand now that enjoyment was never the point. I had discovered that control made me feel less helpless. And during those months, I was helpless more often than I wanted to admit. That was the argument where she told me I was not her mother, and I answered, "I know. I'm the one who stayed." I had apologized for that sentence later. I had not apologized for reading the messages. At the time, I thought separating those two things made me principled. Years later, I could see that it mostly made me rigid. I had wanted Lila to understand that my fear for her justified my decision, while she wanted me to understand that my decision had made her feel watched inside the only room she could call her own. Both things were true, and neither canceled the other. 2 days after I found the old papers, Owen called me. He sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the wedding itself. He and Lila were still under the same roof, but they had apparently spent most of the previous night arguing about what he had seen and what it meant. I did not ask for details. I had already told him his marriage was not mine to manage, and I meant it. What he wanted from me was narrower. "Can I ask you something without you thinking I'm accusing you?" he said. I told him I could not promise what I would think, but he could ask. He hesitated, then said, "If Lila says she felt trapped living with you, do you think she's lying about that?" The question stung because it was fair. "No," I said. "I believe her." Owen was quiet, probably expecting a defense. I gave him one, but not the kind he expected. She was 16. Her parents were in treatment. She was living in my apartment under rules she didn't choose. I checked her phone, set curfews, enforced visit restrictions I didn't create, and said no to things she desperately wanted. I would be surprised if she didn't feel trapped sometimes. Owen asked whether that meant Lila's version was true. "It means her feeling was true," I said. "It doesn't mean the facts she built around that feeling were true." He asked me to explain the difference, and I told him the simplest way I knew. She can honestly remember me as controlling. That does not turn my parents asking me to take her into me, taking her against their will. Owen told me that was the part he was struggling with. Lila had spent years describing those 14 months as though I had seized an opportunity to take over her life. He had believed the emotional details because several of them were true. I understood why. A convincing family lie rarely contains nothing but invention. The strongest ones are built around enough truth that anyone challenging them looks dishonest. I really had taken Lila's phone. I really had searched her messages. I really had refused some visits when the safety plan did not allow them. I really had enforced curfews stricter than the ones she had lived under before. Once those facts were lined up in the right order, the conclusion almost wrote itself. Caroline wanted control. Caroline kept Lila away from her parents. Caroline enjoyed playing mother. Lila made sure that version reached Owen again before the week was over. I learned about it because Owen forwarded me a message after asking permission. It was not some wild rant. That was what made it effective. Lila listed specific things I had done. She wrote that I took her phone, read private messages, controlled when she could see our parents, imposed rules she had never lived under, and told her I was the one who stayed when Mom and Dad could not. Every item on the list was recognizable. Most were true. Marlene apparently repeated the list to 2 relatives and added her own conclusion that I had always had a habit of taking over when nobody asked me to. My first instinct was to answer each point. I opened a blank message and started typing explanations. The phone was taken after she disappeared. The private messages involved an adult. The visits were governed by a plan I did not control. The rules existed because I was legally responsible for carrying out the safety conditions while she lived with me. I had an explanation for every line, and halfway through writing them, I realized I was doing exactly what my family had trained me to do for years. They would choose 10 smaller facts I could not deny, and I would exhaust myself defending the context around each one until nobody remembered the original accusation. I deleted the message. Then I sent Owen something much shorter. Most of that list is true. If you want context for a specific item, ask me. The one thing I'm correcting is the claim that I decided to take Lila, or tried to keep her from our parents. The paperwork you saw answers that. Owen replied almost immediately. That's it? I told him yes. He asked whether I was worried silence would make the rest look worse. The rest can look as bad as it honestly was, I said. I'm not asking you to think I was perfect. That was the first time in years I felt the difference between defending myself and telling the truth. Defending myself required winning every point. Telling the truth did not. That evening, I went back to the box of old papers. The envelope from Mom was still on the table, but I still was not ready to open it. I told myself I wanted to finish sorting everything else first. That was only partly true. The rest of the box contained ordinary debris from a difficult year. School forms, receipts, appointment cards, copies of schedules, and a few photographs I had forgotten existed. Under a folder from Lila's school, I found a small card folded in half. I recognized my own handwriting before I opened it. I had written it after the argument where I told Lila I was the one who stayed. I had forgotten the exact words, but I remembered the shame that produced them. The note was not eloquent. I told her I was sorry for using Mom and Dad's absence against her. I wrote that she had every right to be angry with me, and that I knew being responsible for her did not make me her mother. I also wrote that I was afraid all the time, and sometimes acted like rules could solve things they could not solve. At the bottom I had added, "You don't have to forgive me tonight. I just needed to say I was wrong." There was a crease down the middle, and a smudge where someone had folded it, while the ink was still slightly wet. I could not remember whether I had slipped it under Lila's door, or handed it to her. I did remember that she never answered. At 24, that silence embarrassed me. I had offered an apology and gotten nothing back, so I treated the attempt like a closed transaction. I stopped trying to discuss the argument and concentrated on practical things again. Food, school, appointments, curfew. I see now how quickly I retreated into competence whenever emotion did not reward me immediately. It was one of the reasons Lila and I could live under the same roof for 14 months and still leave with such different stories about what happened there. I set the card aside instead of sending a picture to Owen. It proved nothing except that I had known I hurt her. It did not make me better, and it did not make Lila wrong. The fact that I had apologized was not a receipt I could produce 15 years later and demand credit for. I almost laughed when I caught myself thinking that way. Maybe age had finally taught me something. Near the bottom of the box, a strip of photo booth pictures fell onto the floor. I bent down and picked it up, and for the first time that week I smiled without meaning to. The pictures had been taken at a county fair during the months Lila lived with me. In the first frame, she was looking away while I made some ridiculous face. In the second, she was laughing. By the third, both of us were leaning into the frame because we had realized the booth was about to take another picture. The fourth was blurry because Lila had shoved my shoulder at the last second. I remembered the day almost immediately. We had eaten fried food neither of us needed, argued about whether a carnival game was rigged, and spent more money than we should have trying to win a stuffed bear that Lila insisted looked deformed. For a few hours, nobody mentioned treatment plans, school calls, or return dates. She was my little sister again instead of a responsibility I was terrified of failing. I had forgotten that day, not because it meant nothing, but because the worst memories had eventually become louder. When I turned the strip over, there was writing on the back. Lila's handwriting at 16 was rounder than it became later. She had written, "One good day. Don't ruin it by sending me home yet." I read the sentence twice, then a third time. It would have been easy to feel vindicated. There it was, in Lila's own handwriting, a sentence directly contradicting the version she later repeated that she had spent every day desperate to escape my apartment and return home. For one sharp moment, I imagined sending a photograph of it to Owen, with nothing but a question mark. I imagined placing it beside the other records and watching one more piece of Lila's story collapse. The feeling passed quickly. That note had been written by a 16-year-old girl at the end of one good day. She could have wanted to stay with me that night and wanted to leave the next morning. She could have loved our parents, hated me, felt safe in my apartment, and still felt trapped there. Adolescence was not a sworn affidavit. I knew that better than anyone. Owen called again later, and I mentioned the photo strip because he had asked whether I'd found anything personal among the old papers. He asked if I could send him a picture. I told him I would, but when he said it might help him confront Lila, I stopped him. No, he sounded surprised. Why not? I explained that he could see it if he wanted to understand the history, but I did not want him holding a teenager's handwritten sentence over his wife like courtroom evidence. She was 16. Owen, she gets to contradict herself. He said the note seemed important. I agreed. Important is not the same as proof. He was quiet for a moment, then asked why I was keeping any record of it at all. I looked at the little strip lying beside my old apology card. Because my family turned 14 months into one sentence, I said. Caroline wanted control. Lila wanted to escape. Mom and Dad were victims of both of us. None of that was ever that simple. The photographs did not prove I had been a good caregiver. They did not prove Lila secretly loved living with me. They reminded me that memory had been flattened until every contradictory moment disappeared. After we hung up, I photographed the strip for myself and put the original back in the box. I did not send it to relatives. I did not call Lila. I did not add it to some imaginary case against her. For once, I was trying to let a memory remain complicated instead of forcing it to work for one side. That restraint mattered, because the next thing I found did not belong to a confused teenager. It belonged to an adult who had known exactly what she was writing. The envelope from Mom was still on the kitchen table. I finally opened it. Inside were several pages folded together, written during the period when she and Dad were in treatment and Lila was living with me. The date was from only a few months into the arrangement. I unfolded the first sheet and saw my mother's handwriting filling both sides. I expected apologies, explanations, or maybe another request that I be patient with Lila. Instead, the first paragraph thanked me for getting my sister to school every day, keeping her appointments and enforcing the rules they were not in a position to enforce themselves. Then I reached one sentence and had to sit down. Mom had written, "Thank you for being the one who keeps saying no when we can't." I stared at those words until the ink blurred slightly in front of me. 15 years later, my mother was telling people that I had taken over because I wanted control, but when it was happening, when there had been no audience and no family reputation to protect, she had thanked me for doing exactly the thing she now used as evidence against me. I turned the page, and there was more. There was more on the second page of my mother's letter. And none of it sounded like the woman who had spent the last several years telling people I had wanted control over Lila. Mom had written that she knew Lila was furious with me for enforcing curfew, making sure she attended school, and refusing to bend the rules every time she begged to go home early. She thanked me for taking the anger, because she and Dad were not strong enough yet to handle being the people Lila blamed. One sentence stood out more than the others. If she needs to be angry at someone right now, maybe it's better if she's angry at you until we're steady enough to be her parents again. I remembered the phone conversation behind those words. I remembered standing in my kitchen with one hand pressed against the counter, angry enough that I had written back instead of trusting myself to call. My reply was still folded behind Mom's pages. I had written, "She can be angry with my rules, but I won't lie to her for you. If she asks why she can't come home yet, I'm not going to tell her it's because I decided she can't." I read both letters 3 times. There was no courtroom revelation hidden in them. Mom had not confessed to some grand scheme. She had sounded frightened, ashamed, and grateful. I had sounded exhausted and stubborn. That was precisely why the letters mattered. They had been written while everything was happening, before anybody had spent years polishing a version that made living with the past easier. At the time, Mom knew I was enforcing restrictions because our family was in crisis. She knew Lila's anger was landing on me, partly because I was the adult physically present to say no. She knew I was not willing to tell my sister that I had invented the conditions keeping her from going home. 15 years later, all of that had somehow become Caroline wanted to play mother. I did not send the letters to Owen immediately. I did not even call him. The first person I wanted to hear explain them was the woman who had written them. I made copies the next morning, put the originals back into the envelope, and texted Mom that I wanted to speak to her privately. She replied that she did not want another argument about the wedding. I told her I was not asking about the wedding. After 20 minutes, she agreed to meet me at my parents' house that afternoon. I knew Dad would probably be there, but I asked him not to invite anyone else. No relatives. No Lila. No family group discussion where 10 people could turn one question into a referendum on whether I had ever been difficult. Mom was at the dining table when I arrived. Dad was in the kitchen pretending to make coffee he had already made. I placed the copy of the letter in front of Mom and sat across from her. She recognized her handwriting before she reached the second line. Her face changed, but she did not look surprised that the letter existed. She looked irritated that I had kept it. "You saved this?" she asked. I told her I had saved most of the paperwork from that year because I had been responsible for appointments, school records, and the kinship care documents. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course you did. You always kept files on everyone." There it was again. A habit that had helped me manage a crisis could be transformed into evidence of some deeper character flaw whenever she needed it. I slid the page closer to her. "Read the paragraph in the middle." Mom did not move. I know what I wrote. I asked her to read it anyway. She scanned it, then pushed the paper back toward me. "I was sick, Caroline. Your father and I were barely holding ourselves together. I would have written anything to get through that time." I did not argue about whether she had been sick or desperate. I already knew both things were true. "Did you believe I was helping Lila when you wrote this?" I asked. Mom immediately widened the question. She said everybody had been helping in different ways, that family services had put all of us under enormous pressure, that I had been young and overwhelmed, and that memories from recovery were not always reliable. I let her finish. Then I asked again, "Did you believe I was helping her?" Dad stopped moving in the kitchen. Mom looked at me as though the simplicity of the question was an insult. "Why do you need me to say it that way?" she asked. I told her because she had spent years saying the opposite. Her jaw tightened. "I said you got carried away." I reminded her that she had told relatives I wanted custody. She said that was not the same thing. I asked what she thought people understood when she said it. Mom leaned back in her chair. "You did get too involved." I almost laughed. "You asked me to be involved." She said I was proving her point by refusing to let go of language from 15 years earlier. I looked down at the letter, and then back at her. "I am not asking whether I was too strict. I'm not asking whether I hurt Lila. I'm asking whether, at the time, you believed I was helping your daughter." Dad finally came into the dining room. He stood beside the table with his coffee and looked between us. "It was complicated," he said. I could have predicted the words before he opened his mouth. "Complicated is not the opposite of true," I said. He told me nobody had handled that year perfectly. I agreed. He said Mom had been scared. I agreed again. He looked almost frustrated that I would not fight the points he was offering me. "Then what do you want?" he asked. I pointed at the letter. "A factual answer." Mom crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous." Dad stared into his coffee. Then, so quietly I almost thought I had imagined it, he said, "We needed you." Mom turned toward him. "Victor." He did not look at her. I felt something inside me go strangely still. Dad had not said I had been perfect. He had not said Mom was a liar. He had simply said the sentence both of them had spent years avoiding. "We needed you." 4 words that matched the paperwork, matched Mom's letter, and matched my memory of how the arrangement had begun. Mom reacted as though he had betrayed her. "You're making it sound like we dumped everything on her," she said. Dad answered, "I didn't say that. That's exactly how she's going to use it." I looked at her. "Use it for what?" Mom stood from the table. "For this. Whatever this is. To prove that you were the responsible one and we were failures. I have never asked you to call yourselves failures. You don't have to. You bring out documents and dates and signatures until everyone else feels like they're on trial." I took a breath before answering. "Mom, the documents only became threatening when they stopped matching the story you were telling." That ended the conversation for several seconds. Dad sat down across from me. Mom remained standing. I could see that both of them wanted me to move away from the facts and into the safer territory of feelings. If I said I was hurt, Mom could say she had been hurt too. If I said she had failed me, she could remind me that she was recovering from addiction. If I accused her of being a bad mother, Dad could ask everyone to forgive. But I was not asking whether anybody had been good or bad. I was asking when the truth had changed. "Why did you start telling people I wanted custody?" I asked. Mom shook her head. "I don't remember saying it exactly like that." "I do. You remember everything in the way that makes you right." I did not answer immediately because that accusation had once been effective against me. My memory was not perfect. Nobody's was. That was why I had spent the last few days separating the things I remembered from the things I could verify. "Then let's use the letter," I said. "When you wrote this, you believed I was helping. Somewhere later, you started saying I wanted control. I'm asking what changed." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but the tears did not answer the question. "We were trying to put our family back together," she said. "Do you have any idea what it was like to come home from treatment and know your own daughter trusted her sister more than she trusted you?" That was the first honest thing she had said all afternoon. He sat back. Mom continued before I could respond. She said Lila had returned home angry, confused, and constantly comparing our parents' rules with mine. If Dad told her she could not stay out late, she said I had been stricter. If Mom wanted to know where she was going, Lila accused her of acting like me. Every argument became tangled with the 14 months she had spent in my apartment. Mom said it felt as though I was still standing inside their house, even after Lila had moved back home. "I wasn't there," I said. "I know that." "Then why blame me?" "I didn't blame you. You told people I got carried away. Because you did." There was enough truth in the sentence to make it useful to her. I had gotten carried away with rules at times. I had already admitted that. What I had not understood was how easily that truth allowed Mom to avoid the larger one. If Caroline was naturally controlling, then Lila's anger after reunification did not have to be about parents who had disappeared into addiction and treatment. It could be about an older sister who had become too powerful. Everyone could love Mom and Dad while directing the messy part somewhere else. A memory came back while we sat there. One I had dismissed for years because it seemed too ordinary to matter. It had been several years after Lila moved home. We were at a family dinner for one of Dad's birthdays. An aunt I rarely saw was asking about the period when Lila had stayed with me. She smiled and said, "Caroline practically raised her for a year, didn't she?" I had not thought much of the comment. Before I could answer, Mom laughed and said, "Oh, Caroline got a little carried away helping us. She would have kept Lila forever if we'd let her." Everyone at the table laughed except me. I remember putting down my fork and saying, "That's not what happened." Mom's smile had tightened. "I'm joking." "No, you're not." The table went quiet. Lila was in her early 20s by then, old enough to participate instead of simply listening. She looked at me with immediate irritation. "Can you not do this tonight?" I asked what she meant. "Make Mom feel like garbage every time somebody brings up that year." I told her I had only corrected something that was not true. She said, "You always need everyone to know you were the hero." I remember the heat in my face more clearly than anything else. I told her I had never called myself a hero. She said I did not have to because I acted like one. Dad had leaned toward me and said, "Let it go for tonight." So I did. I left the table early, drove home, and decided I would never again turn a family dinner into a fight over what happened. At the time, That felt like maturity. I told myself I had corrected the lie once, and anybody who cared could ask me later. What I did not understand was that silence does not leave an empty space. Somebody else fills it. Mom kept making small jokes. Lila repeated versions of them. Dad kept asking me not to spoil holidays. Eventually, people stopped hearing a disputed story and started hearing family history. Sitting at my parents' dining table 15 years after the placement began, I realized that dinner had been one of the points where I had started withdrawing. I had thought I was refusing to participate in endless arguments. From Mom's perspective, my withdrawal made her version easier to repeat. That did not make me responsible for what she said. It did explain how a lie I had challenged twice could still spread. Mom left the room after telling Dad she needed air. The back door closed harder than necessary. Dad stayed at the table, staring at the copy of her letter. I waited until I heard her move across the patio before I asked him, "How long did you know?" Dad looked up slowly. "Know what?" "That Lila believed I kept her from you." His face answered before his mouth did. I leaned back. "Dad?" He rubbed a hand over his forehead. "She was young. That isn't what I asked. She came home from your place with a lot of anger." "I know. She thought you were the reason she couldn't come back sooner." "I know that too." Dad's eyes shifted toward the window. "When did you realize she believed that?" He hesitated. "Not long after she came home." I stared at him. 15 years of anger rearranged themselves inside me. I had always assumed Lila's version grew gradually, the way childhood memories sometimes changed when people repeated them. Dad was telling me that our parents had recognized the misunderstanding almost immediately. "Did Mom know?" "Yes." "Did you correct her?" Dad said nothing. I asked again. "Not the way we should have." It was such a Victor answer that I almost admired the precision of the cowardice. "Why?" He took a long breath. "Your mother was just getting stable. Lila was furious with both of us. She barely trusted us. Every time we tried to explain something, it turned into another fight. Your mother thought if we pushed too hard and told Lila that the restrictions came from the treatment plan and from us agreeing to the placement, Lila would turn all of that anger back on her. So you let her keep it on me." Dad flinched. "That's not how we thought about it." "How did you think about it?" "We thought she would understand when she got older." I felt something almost like disbelief. "When?" Dad did not answer. "When was she supposed to understand, Dad? At 18, 25, 31? He looked down. I asked the question again, more quietly. "For how long was she supposed to believe I kept her from you?" He stared at the table. That was when I understood the real damage. My parents had not sat down one night and invented a 15-year lie. They had made a temporary choice. Let Lila believe this for now because recovery is fragile. Let Caroline absorb the anger because she is stronger. We will fix it later. Then later became inconvenient. Each year that passed made correcting the story harder because correcting it meant admitting they had allowed it to continue. Eventually, the misunderstanding became useful enough that nobody wanted to disturb it. Dad finally said, "Your mother was ashamed. So was I. She was trying to rebuild her relationship with Lila. And what was I rebuilding?" He had no answer. I folded the copy of Mom's letter and put it back in my bag. I could have attacked him then. I could have asked him what kind of father watches one daughter carry blame to protect another relationship. Instead, I asked the only question that still mattered to me. "Did you ever tell Lila that you asked me to take her?" Dad thought for a moment. Not clearly. I nodded. That meant no. I left a few minutes later. Mom did not come back inside before I went. I did not chase her onto the patio. I had spent too much of my life following people who walked away from difficult questions and treating their refusal to answer as another problem for me to solve. When I got home, Owen had left a message asking whether I had found anything else in the box. I called him back and told him about Mom's letter. Before I sent anything, I explained why I thought it mattered and what I did not think it proved. "It doesn't prove Lila had a good experience with me," I said. "It proves Mom understood at the time that I was enforcing rules because they needed me to." Owen asked if the letter specifically mentioned the curfew and school. I said yes. He asked if Mom had ever shown it to Lila. I told him I had no idea. I scanned only the pages relevant to the question and sent them to him. The original stayed with me. A few minutes later, Owen called again. Lila told me your mother always believed you wanted control. I know. This doesn't sound like that. No. Did you ask your mother about it? Yes. What did she say? I told him enough to answer his question without turning my parents' private conversation into entertainment. Mom said she had been sick and desperate when she wrote it. Dad admitted they had needed me. Owen was quiet for a while. Then he said, I don't know which version I'm supposed to believe anymore. I understood the temptation in that sentence. When two people describe a family history differently, everyone wants a clean answer where one person is truthful and the other is not. Don't choose a version, I told him. Separate the claims. What does that mean? If Lila says I read her messages, believe her. I did. If she says I was strict, believe her. If she says Mom and Dad never asked me to take her, look at the signatures. If she says I intended to keep her, look at the reunification plan. You don't need one person to be right about everything. Owen gave a tired laugh. You realize that would be much easier. I know. He asked whether I wanted him to tell Lila about the letter. That's your decision, I said. I sent it because you asked me a factual question, not because I want you to use it in a fight. He said he understood, although I was not sure either of us understood what his marriage had become less than a week after the wedding. I thought that would be the last conversation I had about the past that day. I was wrong. Dad called after dark. He sounded different without Mom in the room. Less defensive, but not braver. Sometimes people who spend their lives avoiding conflict can only tell the truth when the person they fear upsetting is somewhere else. I shouldn't have let that go on, he said. I sat down on my couch. No, your mother thought she was protecting Lila. I know what she thought. She was scared Lila would hate her, so she let Lila hate me. Dad did not defend her this time. That silence was the closest thing I had ever received to an admission. He told me that after Lila came home, Mom had recognized very quickly that Lila blamed me for the delayed return. At first, Mom had tried to say the situation had been complicated. But whenever she got close to explaining that she and Dad had agreed to the placement and the safety plan, Lila became furious. She accused them of abandoning her and choosing treatment over their own child. Mom panicked. She started saying things like, Caroline had very strong opinions, or, your sister thought you needed more structure. None of those statements were completely false. Together, they moved responsibility away from my parents. Dad watched it happen. He told himself it was temporary. When Lila was more stable, they would correct it. When Mom was stronger, they would talk about it. When everyone was older, it would matter less. Every excuse depended on a future conversation nobody wanted to have. Did Mom ever tell you she knew the story was becoming false? I asked. Dad hesitated. She knew it was becoming unfair. That distinction made me close my eyes. Unfair, not false. A word soft enough to live with. Dad continued. She thought correcting it would hurt Lila and set your mother back. And you seemed like you were doing fine. I opened my eyes. There it was, the family rule I had never agreed to. The person who appeared strongest became the cheapest person to hurt. You thought I could take it. Dad did not answer. You thought because I went to work and paid my bills and didn't fall apart in front of you, it was safe to let it land on me. That sounds worse than it felt at the time. It usually does when somebody finally says it out loud. He apologized. Not perfectly, not cleanly. His apology came wrapped in explanations about recovery, fear, and wanting to keep the family together. I did not reject it, but I did not rescue him from the discomfort either. When he said, I should have spoken up sooner, I answered, yes. When he said he hoped I understood they had never wanted to hurt me, I told him intention did not erase 15 years of silence. Before we ended the call, Dad said something that stayed with me. Your mother didn't hate you, Caroline. You were just the one person she thought wouldn't leave. I almost told him that was not love. Instead, I said, eventually, everyone leaves something they're being asked to carry forever. I slept badly that night, but for the first time the past itself was no longer the part confusing me. The placement papers showed how Lila came to live with me. The reunification plan showed that keeping her permanently had never been my goal. Mom's own words showed she understood my role while it was happening. Dad had now admitted both parents knew Lila blamed me for decisions that had not been mine alone, and they chose not to correct her because her anger was easier for them to survive when it was directed at me. What I still did not know was how much of that Lila herself knew now. I had been assuming she was still working from a 15-year-old misunderstanding, hardened by years of repetition. If that was true, then however cruel the wedding had been, part of me could still separate the 16-year-old who misunderstood from the 31-year-old woman who had inherited that misunderstanding. Owen called just before 10 the next morning. I checked the file properties again, he said. I was pouring coffee and nearly asked what file he meant before I remembered the scan he had found on the wedding tablet. What about them? There's something else. I set the coffee pot down. Owen sounded careful now. The way people sound when they know a detail is about to change the question they have been asking. The file I saw at the wedding wasn't scanned 15 years ago. I did not say anything, he continued. It was created 8 weeks before we got married. I stood in my kitchen with one hand resting beside the coffee pot, listening to Owen breathe on the other end of the phone. 8 weeks before the wedding put the scan near the end of August. Not 15 years ago, and not sometime during the years when our family had been passing old documents from one drawer to another. I asked him to slow down and tell me exactly what he was looking at. Owen said he had opened the file properties on the PDF he found through the wedding planning iPad. The creation date showed late August. I asked whether that was the date the file had been created on the scanner, or simply the date an older file had synchronized to Lila's cloud account. There was a pause while he checked again. I could hear him tapping through menus. It says, created by the home scanner, he finally said. Same date. There's a scan job in the history. I asked whether he was certain. He said yes. I poured coffee into my mug and did not drink it. That tells us when it was scanned, I said. It doesn't tell us what she read. Owen went quiet. Caroline, why would she scan it if she didn't read it? I didn't say she didn't. Then what are you saying? I'm saying we know a file was created. That is not the same thing as knowing what was in her head. He let out a slow breath. I knew I was frustrating him. I also knew what it felt like when suspicion became so attractive that every new detail began looking like confirmation. I had done that with Lila when she was 16. A missed curfew became proof she was hiding something. A phone turned face down became proof of danger. Sometimes I had been right. That did not make the habit safe. If Owen was going to decide that his wife had knowingly lied to him before their wedding, I wanted that conclusion built on more than a timestamp and anger. Can you tell where the scan happened? I asked. At their house. My parents? No, Lila's account says it came from the scanner registered to your parents' home network. That narrowed the possibilities. Mom and Dad still had a multi-function printer in the room they called the office, although half the drawers were filled with warranties and old tax folders nobody had opened in years. If Lila had scanned those papers there in late August, I could think of one reason she might have been searching through old family files around that time. Near the end of August, Lila had gone to our parents' house to collect documents for the wedding and honeymoon. I remembered because she had called me that afternoon, asking if I knew where Mom kept old birth certificates. She needed hers for administrative paperwork related to travel, and Mom had apparently moved the fireproof document pouch after reorganizing the office. I told Lila where it had always been when we were younger, then made a joke about Mom hiding important papers in places so safe she could never find them again. Lila laughed. It had been an ordinary conversation, maybe 6 minutes long. At the time, I had no reason to remember it. Looking back from 10 months later, I could map several small changes after that day. I had invited Lila to lunch the following week because I was going to be near her side of town. She agreed, then canceled the morning of, saying wedding errands had gotten out of control. Nothing strange about that. Brides canceled lunches. 2 weeks later, she sent me a brief message. saying she had finalized family photo logistics and did not need me to arrive early for pictures after all. I remembered thinking I had not known I was supposed to arrive early in the first place. When I asked what time she wanted me there, she sent the general guest arrival time. Again, it was irritating, not suspicious. There had been other little things. A conversation with Mom stopped when I entered the room at a family dinner. Lila removed me from a group text about wedding transportation because, she said, I was driving myself and did not need the extra notifications. She stopped asking my opinion about practical details she had previously asked about, even though I had not been especially involved in planning. None of it had registered as a pattern because the obvious explanation was that she was 8 weeks away from a wedding and already under stress. I told Owen exactly that. So her behavior changed right after the scan, he said. Maybe. That sounds like more than maybe. It sounds like hindsight. He asked what the difference was. The difference is that I can make almost anything look meaningful after I know where the story ends. That answer slowed him down. I sat at my kitchen table and opened the calendar on my phone, scrolling back to August. The canceled lunch was there. So was a dinner at my parents' house, a dress fitting Lila had mentioned, and a reminder I had set to send her the contact information for a florist she had asked about months earlier. Normal life. Normal family friction. If I wanted to build a case, I could line up every awkward interaction after the scan and announce that Lila had begun plotting against me. If I wanted the truth, I had to admit those same interactions could have happened even if she had never opened the documents at all. Owen asked whether I had ever tried to show Lila the placement paperwork before. Yes. His response came quickly. When? I leaned back and closed my eyes, because I knew exactly which conversation he meant even before I chose one. The first serious attempt had happened a few years after Lila moved back home. She was in college by then and had come to my apartment for dinner. We were not close, but we were trying. That was the period when our relationship could go 2 or 3 months without conflict, and then collapse over a sentence neither of us knew was loaded until it was too late. That evening, we had been talking about a cousin who was taking care of her younger brother during a family emergency. I made some comment about how hard it was to become responsible for someone else's routine overnight. Lila's expression changed. You liked it, she said. I asked what she meant. Being responsible for me. I liked knowing you were safe. That's not what I said. I remember putting down my fork because I knew we were no longer talking about our cousin. Lila said. You wanted me there. At first, no, I was terrified. You wanted to keep me once you had me. That's not true. She laughed in that sharp way she had when she thought I was trying to rewrite something obvious. You were the one telling everyone I couldn't go home. I was telling people the plan wasn't complete. You always have an explanation. Because there was an actual plan, Lila. She pushed her chair back slightly. Here we go. I told her Mom and Dad had asked me to take her, and that the arrangement had always been temporary. Lila shook her head before I finished. Mom said you pushed because you thought they weren't capable. They weren't capable at that moment. Her face tightened. That was another mistake of mine. Accurate, badly timed, and guaranteed to sound like contempt for parents she was still trying to forgive. I softened my voice and told her I had paperwork if she ever wanted to see it. She looked at me as though I had offered to produce evidence that her memories were defective. Stop rewriting my childhood, she said. I told her I was not trying to rewrite anything. She stood up, picked up her purse, and said, You don't get to decide what happened to me just because you kept receipts. I did not stop her at the door. For years afterward, I wondered whether I should have. Part of me thought I should have followed her outside with the folder in my hand and forced her to look. Another part knew that would have proven every accusation she was making about me. Caroline had evidence. Caroline had rules. Caroline had decided the conversation would continue whether Lila wanted it to or not. So I let her leave. That was not the only time I corrected the story. Several years later, at Thanksgiving, Mom made one of those jokes she used when she wanted to say something serious without accepting responsibility for the sentence. We were crowded around my parents' dining table, passing serving dishes and trying not to talk about politics. An aunt asked how Lila and I had survived sharing my small apartment for more than a year. Mom laughed and said, Caroline would have kept her forever if we hadn't dragged her back. The table laughed. I did not. No, I said. You asked me to take her. Mom's smile stayed in place. Oh, Caroline, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm correcting what you just said. Lila put down her glass. Mom immediately shifted tone. Your sister just can't let us have one holiday without putting our worst year on display. That move had worked on me before. It took a factual correction and transformed it into a moral accusation. Suddenly, the question was not whether Mom's sentence had been true. The question was whether I was cruel enough to embarrass a recovering parent at Thanksgiving. I didn't bring up that year, I said. You did. Dad leaned toward me. Let it go for one night. I remember looking at him, then at Mom, then at Lila. Nobody asked Mom to let it go. Nobody asked why the joke needed to be made. The responsibility for restoring peace had landed on me because I had objected to the version that made everyone else comfortable. So I did something that became a rule for the next several years. I stopped arguing. Not completely. If someone said a lie in front of me, I corrected it once. If Mom said I wanted custody, I said I did not. If Lila said I prevented reunification, I said the timing was controlled by the family services plan, not me. Then I stopped. I did not call the people who had already heard Marlene's version. I did not send documents after family dinners. I did not chase relatives through holidays demanding they update their memories. At the time, I believed that was the healthiest boundary I had ever set. Correct what is said in front of you. Do not spend your life running behind other people with a file folder. What I failed to account for was that Mom was still talking when I was not in the room. That did not make my withdrawal wrong. I still believe nobody should have to conduct a permanent public relations campaign for their own family history. But it meant that by the time Lila got married, her version had been repeated to Owen for years, while mine had barely existed outside occasional corrections nobody wanted to hear. When I finished telling Owen about those two conversations, he asked, "So she knew there were documents. She knew I said there were. That's not the same thing?" "No, Caroline." I offered to show them. She refused. If she never saw them, she could still believe I was bluffing or exaggerating. He was quiet for a few seconds. You keep giving her every possible benefit of the doubt. I'm giving the evidence the benefit of the doubt. That sounds exhausting. It is. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Then he asked the question I knew had been sitting underneath the conversation from the beginning. Should I ask her why she scanned them? I looked at the calendar still open on my phone. Late August. 8 weeks before the wedding. The creation time was suspicious. Lila's changed behavior was suspicious. Mom's reaction at the wedding was more suspicious than either. Put together, they formed a picture that made my stomach tighten. They still did not tell us what Lila had actually read. Not yet, I said. Owen sounded incredulous. What are we waiting for? Something that shows knowledge, not access. She's my wife. I know. If she found documents that contradicted what she told me about you, I need to know. Yes. Then why shouldn't I ask her? Because you are already angry. So are you. Exactly. That stopped him. I told him if he confronted Lila with nothing but metadata, she could say she scanned a pile of papers without reading them carefully. Maybe that would be true, maybe it would not. If Owen accused her first, every later fact would arrive inside a fight about whether he trusted her. I had spent too many years watching facts disappear inside emotional arguments. What would count? He asked. Something she said at the time. A text? Maybe. An email? Anything where she describes what she found. He said he would check his own messages, but I told him not to go through devices or accounts that were not his. That was not only about privacy, it was about credibility. I knew exactly how quickly a legitimate question could become contaminated by the way someone searched for the answer. After we hung up, I tried to work. I answered emails, returned a call, and made it almost an hour before I realized I had reread the same paragraph on my screen 4 times. The date kept sitting at the edge of my attention. 8 weeks. I finally called Dad. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was cautious now whenever he saw my name. as though every conversation with me had become a test he had not studied for. Everything okay? I need to ask you about August. What happened in August? The day Lila went to your house looking for her birth certificate? Dad did not answer immediately. I felt my attention sharpen. You remember that? I remember her getting paperwork. Did she go through the old family services box? Another pause. I don't know what she went through. Did she tell you she found anything? Dad sighed. Caroline, I thought we were trying to calm this down. I'm asking one question. You always say that, then there are 6 more. If you answer the first one, maybe there won't be. That was not entirely true, and we both knew it. He said, your mother handled most of that. The old reflex. Move the information toward Mom and move himself away from responsibility. Were you there? Yes. Did Lila say she found papers about the year she lived with me? Silence again. This time it lasted long enough that I stood from my desk and walked toward the window. Dad, I don't remember exactly what she said. That wasn't my question. He let out a breath through his nose. I knew him well enough to recognize the difference between someone searching for a memory and someone deciding whether to give it to you. Was there a conversation? I asked. Yes. In person? Some of it. That answer caught me. Some of it? Dad went quiet. I asked. Was there a family text? Nothing. Dad, your mother is going to kill me. I closed my eyes. That wasn't my question. He muttered something I could not hear. Was there a text thread? Yes. My pulse picked up. Who was in it? Your mother. Me, Lila. Was I? No. That part did not surprise me. Do you still have it? Dad said he did not delete family messages because he never knew which photos or dates Mom would later ask him to find. It was such an ordinary explanation that I believed him immediately. He had years of group chats sitting on his phone because clearing storage required decisions, and Dad avoided decisions with the same devotion other people brought to exercise. I asked if he would send me the relevant messages. No. The answer came so quickly it almost made me smile. Why? Because then I'm choosing sides. You already chose sides when you stayed silent for 15 years. That's not fair. It's accurate. He said Mom would see forwarding the thread as a betrayal. I told him I was not asking for private conversations about treatment, marriage, or anything unrelated to me. I wanted only the part where my name and the old documents were discussed. That still involves Lila. I know. She was upset. I know. You'll use it against her. That made me stop. What do you think I'm going to do, Dad? I don't know anymore. Yes, you do. He did not answer. I sat back down at my desk. I didn't send the photo strip to anyone. I didn't send Mom's whole letter around. I redacted the documents I gave Owen. I've spent this entire week separating what can be proven from what I only suspect. Dad remained quiet. Then I said, if the thread shows Lila did not understand those papers, that helps her. That got his attention. What? If she wrote something that proves she misunderstood them, I need to know that too. You'd accept that? I'm not trying to win. The words came out more sharply than I intended. I lowered my voice. I'm trying to know what happened. Dad was quiet for nearly half a minute. When he spoke again, he sounded older than he had a week earlier. I'll send one screenshot. Send enough for context. One section. That's fine. And you don't tell your mother I gave it to you. No. He seemed relieved too quickly. I'm not agreeing to keep it secret, I said. I'm saying I won't call her just to announce you sent it. If she asks me directly where it came from, I'm not lying. Dad made a tired sound. You always make everything harder. No, I make the terms clear. We ended the call 5 minutes later. The screenshot arrived almost immediately. I stared at the notification before opening it. For a second, I thought about forwarding it to Owen unread. That would have been easier. Let the husband decide what his wife meant. Let someone else hold the next piece of the story. But the conversation concerned me, so I opened it. The date at the top was the same late August afternoon when Lila had called asking about her birth certificate. Dad's screenshot showed the family group thread with Mom, Dad, and Lila. There were ordinary messages above it about a passport photo and whether Mom still had a certified copy of Lila's birth certificate. Then the subject changed. Lila had written, I found the old papers about Caroline. You both signed it. I read the sentence once. Then again. It was not enough to prove everything. But it proved more than the scan date. Lila had not merely run a stack of documents through a machine. She had seen the signatures. Below it was a response from Mom, but Dad's screenshot cut off part of the thread. I could see only the beginning of Mom telling Lila that forms did not explain what those months had felt like for her. That was true. It was also exactly the kind of sentence Mom used when a fact became inconvenient. I called Dad back. You cut off the rest. I sent what you asked for. You sent half a conversation. I sent the part where she said she found them. There's another message below it. He did not answer. Dad, I don't want to be in the middle. You are already in the thread. That doesn't mean I want to become part of whatever happens next. For once, I understood the fear behind his avoidance. If he sent the entire exchange, and it proved Lila knew more than she had admitted, Mom would see him as the person who had handed me the weapon. He had spent his whole marriage protecting himself from exactly that role. I did not yell. I did not threaten him. I said, "Then don't send it." He sounded surprised. What? If you think protecting that conversation matters more than correcting what happened, keep it. Caroline, but don't tell me later that you had no choice. The line went quiet. I was about to hang up when another image arrived. Then another. Dad had sent the rest of the thread. I opened the first screenshot. Lila had written again beneath Mom's response. This time, there was no ambiguity about whether she had only noticed signatures. The plan says I was supposed to come home after you finished treatment. My hand went still around the phone. For 15 years, my sister had said I was the person who kept her from going home. 8 weeks before her wedding, she had read the line, proving that was never my decision. And there were still more messages below it. The next screenshot from Dad showed the part of the conversation he had apparently been most reluctant to give me. Under Lila's message about the reunification plan, she had written, "Caroline signed it too. It literally says she agreed I was supposed to come home once you finished the requirements." I read that line slowly, then looked back at the first screenshot. You both signed the placement. The plan says I was supposed to come home after you finished treatment. Caroline signed the page saying she supported reunification. 3 separate statements. All written by my sister 8 weeks before her wedding. All in her own words. Whatever argument remained about how she had experienced those 14 months, one defense was gone. She could no longer reasonably say she had scanned the papers without understanding what they meant. Mom had answered several minutes later. Forms don't tell you what it was like living with her. They don't erase what she did or how trapped you felt. That was exactly the kind of answer I would have expected from her. It was not entirely false. It was also not an answer to anything Lila had written. Lila had not asked whether paperwork erased her feelings. She had asked why our family had spent years saying I wanted to keep her when the papers showed something different. Dad had responded with one sentence. That period was hard on everyone. I could almost hear his voice in it, carefully placing equal amounts of fog over every person in the conversation. Lila's next message was the one that made me put my phone down. Then I don't want Caroline in the real family pictures. I can't stand there beside her pretending this changes nothing. Mom replied, "Then keep the photo list simple. Just don't make the wedding about old history." A few minutes later, Lila wrote, "Fine. I'll handle it." There was no instruction from Mom telling her to humiliate me. No cartoon villain agreement to lie. They did not need one. Lila had stated what she intended to do after reading documents that contradicted the story she had told for years. And Mom's response was not to tell her to slow down or talk to me. It was to keep the wedding clean. I called Dad immediately. He answered with, "You got them." "Yes. I told you I would send the thread. You sent it after making me pull it out of you one screen at a time. I didn't want this turning into another family war." I looked at the messages again. It already was one. I just didn't know when it started. Dad said nothing. I asked him whether the screenshots were in the correct order. He said yes. I asked if messages were missing between the ones he sent. He said no, not in the section about the papers. I asked whether he had seen the conversation when it happened or was only reading it now. "I saw it that day," he admitted. Your mother and I were sitting in the house when Lila found the box. She was upset. She took pictures, scanned things, kept asking questions. Did she misunderstand the documents? I don't think so. That isn't precise enough. Dad sighed. Caroline, she just wrote what she thought they said. And was she wrong? No. That was all I needed from him on that point. I did not ask him what he thought Lila felt. I did not ask whether Mom had manipulated her in those exact minutes. The messages answered the factual question. My sister had read the core information correctly. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Dad's voice became quieter. I thought your mother was right. I thought bringing you into it before the wedding would blow everything up. So you decided to get through the wedding? Yes. I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall even though the wedding date had already passed. You got through it, I said. Look what it cost. He started to say something about Lila being under pressure, but I stopped him. Dad, I'm not asking you to defend her right now. I'm asking you to understand the difference between 16 and 31. He said he did. I was not sure he did. But for once, I did not spend another 15 minutes teaching a grown man how to answer for his own silence. After I hung up, I sent the screenshots to Owen because I did not circle sentences or explain how angry he should be. I forwarded them exactly as Dad had sent them, with the dates visible. Owen called less than 10 minutes later. She knew. I could hear the shock in his voice, but I still corrected the wording. She knew the signatures were there. She knew reunification was the goal. She knew I had signed the acknowledgement. And she told me you tried to keep her. Yes. He inhaled sharply. Then he read aloud the line about the photos. I don't want Caroline in the real family pictures. I closed my eyes. Hearing someone else say it made the wedding scene feel different. Until that moment, I had still been allowing for the possibility that Lila's shove had been spontaneous, an ugly reaction triggered by seeing me move into a group she did not want me in. Now I knew the exclusion itself had been decided 8 weeks earlier. Owen said, I need to call the photographer. For what? The shot list. I understood before he explained. He and Lila were both clients. The photographer had already mentioned having an older printed list and a final digital one. If Lila had changed the list after the family text, there might still be an email or client portal record showing when she sent the update. Ask whether he still has the revision, I said. Don't tell him what you think it proves, just ask for the record. Owen gave a short, tired laugh. You really can't stop being precise, can you? No. For once, he did not sound annoyed. The photographer responded later that afternoon. Owen forwarded the email to me. There was no sophisticated forensic dashboard, no magical archive. The photographer simply had the original correspondence because that was how Lila had sent the revised family photo list. The timestamp was from the day after the family group text. The attachment was titled, Family Photos Final. I opened it. Bride with parents. Bride and groom with parents. Groom with immediate family. Bride with immediate family. Bride with siblings. Full family portrait. Extended family and guests. My name appeared once. Extended family and guests. Owen also forwarded the older list the photographer had printed from a prior version. On that one, Caroline Reed appeared under Bride with siblings, Bride with immediate family, and full family portrait. I compared the two. Same wedding. Same photographer. Same family. One day after Lila wrote that she had discovered our parents signed the placement, that reunification had been the goal, and that I had agreed to support it, I stopped being her sister on paper. I stayed a guest. That was the part that hurt more than I expected. She had not wanted me completely absent. If I had not attended, people might have asked why. My presence allowed her to say there was no estrangement serious enough to discuss. I could sit at a distant table, smile politely, appear in a broad guest picture, and become proof that the family was functioning. What she did not want was an image that placed me beside her as a sister. I thought back to the photographer raising his hand at the wedding. Sister, come in closer. He had not been challenging Lila. He was working from the human reality in front of him. Bride. Parents. Sister. Move closer. That ordinary instruction had collided with a boundary Lila had already drawn in private. Her hand against my arm made sense differently now. I still could not know exactly what she had been thinking in that moment, and I was not going to pretend I could. But I knew what she had written 8 weeks earlier, what she had sent the photographer the next day, and what she had done when the photographer accidentally placed me where she had already decided I did not belong. That was enough. I called Lila. She did not answer. I sent one message. I want to talk to you alone. No Owen. No mom or dad. Not over text. If you don't want to, say so and I'll leave it there. She replied almost an hour later. Tomorrow. 2. We met at a quiet coffee shop far enough from both our homes that neither of us could turn the conversation into a family gathering. I arrived first and chose a table in the back. I did not bring the entire storage box. I had 3 things in a slim folder: the signed placement page, the reunification acknowledgement, and printed copies of the family text Dad had sent me. The photographer's revision stayed on my phone. I did not need a dramatic stack of evidence. Lila walked in wearing jeans, a sweater, and the expression she used whenever she expected me to disappoint her. She ordered coffee and sat across from me. If this is about convincing Owen you were some saint, I'm leaving. It isn't. You've been sending him documents all week. He asked me questions, and you loved that. I almost reacted. The accusation landed exactly where she intended because it touched an old weakness. I liked being able to answer things. I liked order. I liked the moment confusion became something I could organize. That did not mean I enjoyed what was happening to her marriage. I'm not going to argue with you about what I enjoyed, I said. I want to start with what I actually did. Her eyebrows drew together. I read your messages when you were 16. You invaded my privacy? Yes. I knew it. I took your phone. Yes. I tightened your curfew. Yes. You controlled when I could see Mom. I enforced restrictions that were part of the plan, and sometimes I handled them too rigidly. So yes, from your side, I controlled access. Lila stared at me, suspicious now because I was not resisting. I told you I was the one who stayed. I continued. That was cruel. I knew it then, and I know it now. I was controlling sometimes. I confused being responsible for you with needing to manage everything. I will answer for all of that. Her mouth opened, then closed. I put my hands flat on the table. Now answer for what you said I did. Her expression hardened again. There it is. There what is? The trial. No. A question. You always do this. You admit one thing, so you can prove you're right about everything else. I'm not right about everything else. I opened the folder and placed the placement page on the table. But Mom and Dad signed this. She barely glanced at it. I know. I placed the reunification page beside it. And you knew before the wedding that the goal was for you to go home after they completed the plan. Papers don't show what living with you felt like. No. Her eyes shifted to mine. They don't, I repeated. They only show I didn't do what you've spent 15 years saying I did. Lila pushed her coffee away. You don't get to reduce my childhood to paperwork. I'm not. That's exactly what you're doing. If you say I read your private messages, I agree with you. If you say I was too controlling sometimes, I agree with you. If you say I said something cruel, I agree with you. If you say I asked Mom and Dad to let me keep you because I wanted control, I don't agree, because it didn't happen. You wanted me there. Sometimes I did. Her face changed slightly. That answer surprised her. There were days I loved having you there, I said. There were days I wanted my apartment and my life back so badly I could barely stand it. Both happened. You always make yourself sound so reasonable. I'm not asking you whether I sound reasonable. She looked toward the window. I took out the screenshots and placed them beside the other pages. You found these 8 weeks before the wedding. Her eyes dropped to her own messages. Her jaw tightened. You told Mom and Dad that they both signed the placement. You wrote that the plan said you were supposed to return after they completed the requirements. You wrote that I signed in support of reunification. I was trying to understand legal documents. I tapped the first line. You understood this. They were old papers. You understood that too. Caroline, there were pages of things I didn't understand. I'm not asking about those pages. Her voice rose slightly. You see? This is what you do. You narrow everything until the answer can only be the one you want. I leaned back. No. I narrow it so we don't hide one question inside 10 others. She looked furious. Good. I was furious too. Anger did not make either of us correct. I continued. Did you know before the wedding that Mom and Dad had signed the arrangement? Yes. Did you know before the wedding that the stated goal was reunification? Yes. Did you know I had signed acknowledging that goal? Yes. Each answer came harder than the last. I nodded. That's all I was asking. Lila gave a bitter laugh. Congratulations. I'm not celebrating. You should be. Owen thinks I lied to him. Did you tell him I tried to keep you? She did not answer. Leela, you did keep me from going home. That decision was not mine. You said no. I enforced a plan whose return conditions were not mine to waive. To a 16-year-old, what difference does that make? At 16? Maybe none. She froze. I let the silence sit between us. At 16, I repeated. I understand why you blamed the person standing in front of you. I understand why hearing me say you couldn't go home sounded like I was deciding it. I understand why Mom telling you I was controlling fit what you already felt. Don't talk about me like I was stupid. I'm not. That's what it sounds like. You were a kid in a terrible situation. That isn't stupidity. Lila's eyes had begun to shine, but her voice stayed angry. You were awful to live with sometimes. I believe you. You made me feel like every mistake could destroy everything. That was wrong. You read my private life like I belonged to you. I did. You treated Mom and Dad like they were irresponsible children. Sometimes I did that too. She stared at me as though she was running out of weapons and resented me for taking them away by admitting they were real. Then she said, So what do you want? The answer you still haven't given me. What answer? I took out my phone and opened the revised photo list. You wrote that after reading the papers you didn't want me in the core family pictures. Her face went still. The next day, you sent this to the photographer. I put the phone on the table. She did not need to look closely. She knew what it was. You removed me from Bride with Siblings. Immediate family, full family portrait. You left me in the guest group. It was my wedding. Yes. I could choose my pictures. Yes. The answer visibly irritated her. Then why are we having this conversation? Because you keep talking as though I wandered into a picture where I wasn't supposed to be and forced you to react? You had decided 8 weeks earlier. I didn't want you standing there acting like we were close. We aren't close. Then why did you walk into the picture? The photographer called me. You could have stayed back. I could have. I didn't know I had been secretly removed from the list. It wasn't secret. You never told me. I didn't owe you an explanation for my wedding photos. No. But you don't get to rewrite what happened when you shoved me out of one. Lila looked away again. I could have brought up the county fair photograph then. I had it on my phone. I could have shown her the handwriting from 16. One good day. Don't ruin it by sending me home yet. It would have embarrassed her. It might even have made her question one more absolute statement she had repeated over the years. I did not use it. A teenager was allowed to want contradictory things. She could want to live with me after a good day and hate me after a bad one. She could miss our parents and still feel safer in my apartment. I was not going to turn one sentence she wrote at 16 into a weapon simply because Lila had turned other memories into weapons against me. She noticed me put my phone away. What else? Nothing. You brought all this just to tell me you were right? No. Then what? I looked at my sister, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt less angry than tired. I want to know why you kept telling the same factual story after you knew it wasn't true. Lila rubbed her thumb along the edge of her cup. I told you. Those papers don't change what you were like. I know. You don't know what those years did to me. I know what some of them did. No, you know your version. That's possible. She looked up sharply. I continued before she could use the opening to move us somewhere else. But none of that answers why you kept telling people I took you from Mom and Dad after you knew they had asked me. I didn't use those exact words with everyone. You used them with Owen. Silence. You told the man you were about to marry that I wanted to keep you. He knew I meant you were controlling. Did he? She looked down. That answer was enough. I asked, why didn't you tell him what you found? Lila's face tightened. Because it was 8 weeks before my wedding. That explains the timing, not the choice. You think everything is easy when you put it into one of your little categories. I don't think this is easy. You have no idea what it would have meant. Then tell me. She shook her head. Tell me, if I went to Owen and said, actually, Caroline didn't do the thing I've been telling you she did, what was I supposed to say next? The truth. She laughed, and this time there were tears in her eyes. You really don't understand. Then help me. She stood as if she might leave, then sat again. If you were right about that, she said, then Mom was wrong. I waited. And Dad knew. Yes. And all those years I defended them. I was defending the people who let me blame you. Yes. Her eyes narrowed as if even my agreement offended her. And then what? I call you and apologize? I tell Owen I've been wrong about you? I tell everyone I've said things about you that weren't true? I said nothing. She gave a small, broken laugh. That's what you wanted. No. Of course it is. I wanted you to stop saying the thing that wasn't true. It's the same thing. No, it isn't. To you. To anyone. She shook her head hard. You don't get it. If you were right, then everything I did to you was wrong. The words landed between us. Not everything. That was the tragedy of it. Some of Lila's anger had been justified. Some of my choices had hurt her. Some of the distance between us belonged to both of us. But once she made my innocence on one factual accusation mean that every grievance she had ever felt must also disappear, she had trapped herself. Admitting one lie felt like surrendering her entire identity. You were 16 then, I said. Her face crumpled for half a second before she rebuilt it. You weren't 16 8 weeks ago. Lila stared at me for several seconds. Then she stood, took her purse, and told me she was done. I did not stop her. I did not follow her into the parking lot. I sat at the table until her coffee stopped steaming, then put the papers back into my folder and went home. The first screenshot arrived that evening from my cousin. She wrote, I don't know what's going on, but your mom called Aunt Denise and said you found old documents and twisted them to make Owen think Lila lied about her childhood. Beneath that was a screenshot of a message from Mom saying I had been obsessed with proving myself right for years and had used the wedding to finally attack Lila's marriage. 20 minutes later, an aunt sent me another one. This time, the message came from Lila. She said I had staged the confrontation at the wedding by feeding old paperwork to Owen and waiting until the family pictures to make an issue of it. I sat at my dining table and looked at the 2 screenshots beside the documents I had spent the previous week verifying. I had not given Owen the first page. I had not known the scan existed. I had been walking away when Diane stopped the photographer. Lila knew all 3 things. Mom knew enough of them. And now, after 15 years of letting one false story harden into family history, they had decided the safest way to survive the truth was to manufacture another one. That was the moment I stopped asking whether I should defend myself. The question became, how many times I was going to give them the chance to tell the truth before I let their own answers speak for them. The next morning I made a list. Not of enemies. Not of people I wanted embarrassed. I wrote down the names of everyone who had contacted me since the wedding and divided them into 3 groups. The first group consisted of people who were curious and had no real stake in what happened. They got nothing. The second group had heard some version of the story but had not changed the way they treated me because of it. They got nothing too. The third group was smaller. Those were the people Mom or Lila had contacted directly after the wedding with the new claim that I had staged the confrontation, fed documents to Owen, and used the photographs to attack Lila's marriage. Some of them had repeated it to me as fact. Those were the only people I intended to correct. It was the first time I had deliberately broken the rule I had lived by for years. Correct the lie if it is said in front of you. Then walk away. That rule had protected my sanity for a long time, but it had been designed for old family gossip, not an active smear campaign happening in real time. Mom and Lila were no longer just repeating a distorted childhood story. They were assigning me actions from 3 weeks earlier that I knew I had not taken. They were counting on the fact that I hated public fights enough to let them do it. I still did not want a public fight. I wanted a correction. There was a difference. Before I sent anything to anyone else, I decided to give Mom, Dad, and Lila one final opportunity to correct the record themselves. I did not call. Phone conversations were too easy to reshape later. I did not show up at anybody's house. I did not write an emotional essay about 15 years of pain. I sent each of them the same message separately, with the same 3 questions. Because I wanted each person to answer without hiding inside the voice of the family. I wrote, "Before I respond to what is being said about me, I want to give you a chance to correct 3 factual points. I am not asking why anyone felt the way they did. I am asking what you maintain happened." Then I wrote the first question. Do you maintain that Mom and Dad did not ask me to take care of Lila under the family services plan? The second was just as narrow. Do you maintain that, before the wedding, Lila did not know Mom and Dad had signed the placement and that reunification was the stated goal? The third took me the longest because I wanted no room for arguments about motive that could not be proven. Do you maintain that Lila did not remove me from the core family photo list after telling the family group that, because of what she had just read, she did not want me in those family sets? At the end, I added, "If any of those statements are inaccurate, correct them now. I will not argue with you. I will use your written answer when I correct the claims being made about me." I read the message 6 times before sending it. There was no threat in it. No deadline saying respond by midnight or I expose you. No mention of Owen leaving. No promise to send documents to every wedding guest. I was giving 3 adults the easiest opportunity they were ever going to get to say, "We handled this badly." Here's what actually happened. Dad called me 11 minutes later. I almost did not answer because I had specifically asked for written responses, but I picked up. "I can't answer those the way your mother is going to want me to," he said. I closed my eyes. "Then don't. You know what this is going to do." "No, I know what happened. What everyone chooses now is theirs." Dad exhaled heavily. "The first answer is no. I can't say we didn't ask you. We did. Write that. I'm telling you. I need you to write it." "Why?" "Because 6 months from now I don't want to hear that I misunderstood a phone call." He did not like that, but he had earned it. I continued. "What about the second question?" I saw the thread. She knew we signed. "And reunification?" "She wrote about it. So write that." Dad was quiet. "The third one?" I asked. I saw what she said about the pictures. I didn't see her email the photographer. "Owen has the email from the photographer." "I know." "Then write what you personally know. Don't write more." That was important to me. I was not asking Dad to become my witness by repeating evidence he had not seen himself. If he wanted to start telling the truth, he could begin with his own piece of it. He asked, "What happens if I send this?" "I don't know. Your mother is going to think I betrayed her." I looked out the window at a delivery truck backing into the parking lot across the street. "Dad, telling the truth about something you did is not betraying the person who wants you to deny it. You make things sound very clean. They aren't clean, they're just specific." He laughed once, sadly. "You always were good at that." "I know." For the first time, I did not hear the sentence as criticism. Dad sent his answer 20 minutes later. It was short. "Marlene and I asked Caroline to take Lila during the period we were completing the family services plan. I was part of the group text in August, where Lila said she found the old paperwork and referred to our signatures and the reunification language. I also saw her message saying she did not want Caroline in the core family photos after finding those documents. I should have corrected the story years ago. I did not. I sat with the message open for several minutes. The last sentence was not something I had asked him to write. I did not thank him for being brave. Telling the truth after 15 years did not need a medal. I wrote back, "Received." Mom responded an hour later. Her message was almost 3 times as long as Dad's. She began by accusing me of weaponizing documents from the worst period of her life. She said I had always been more interested in proving facts than understanding what the family had suffered. She said the kinship arrangement had happened because family services was pressuring them and because I inserted myself into every decision. She did not directly say they never asked me, but she ended that section with, "I will not accept your claim that your father and I simply asked you to take over our daughter as though that is what happened." I read it again. The paperwork did not say they asked me to take over their daughter. Neither had I. I had asked whether they requested that I care for Lila under the plan. Mom had changed the sentence because the real one was harder to deny. On the second question, she wrote, "Lila found papers, but finding forms does not mean she understood what they meant or that they changed the reality of what she lived through." That answer was more direct. Unfortunately for Mom, I had Lila's own messages explaining exactly what the forms said. On the third question, Mom wrote, "I had nothing to do with the photographer's list. Lila made her own decisions about who she wanted in her family photographs, and trying to connect that decision to old paperwork is your interpretation." That one almost impressed me. It ignored the message where Lila had explicitly connected the two. Mom had taken 3 verifiable questions and turned each one into a cloud of feelings, intent and language, soft enough that she could still tell herself she had not lied. I saved the response. Lila did not answer until late that night. Her message was much shorter. "This is insane. I did not know what those papers really meant before the wedding. I was upset and trying to process old information. The photo list had nothing to do with the documents. I removed you because we were not close and I did not want fake family pictures. You are using paperwork and private messages to destroy my marriage and make yourself look like the victim." I read it once. Then I opened Dad's screenshots. Lila's own words from 8 weeks before the wedding were right there. "You both signed it. The plan says I was supposed to come home after you finished treatment. Caroline signed it too. It literally says she agreed I was supposed to come home once you finished the requirements." Then, in the same conversation, "I don't want Caroline in the real family pictures." I opened the photographer's email. The next day, my name disappeared from the core family sets. I went back to Lila's new message. I did not know what those papers really meant. The photo list had nothing to do with the documents. That was the moment the story changed for me. Until then, part of the conflict still belonged to memory. Lila had been 16. She had been frightened and angry. She had lived under my rules during a year when the adults she trusted had stopped being dependable. Her memories could be distorted without being dishonest. Even 8 weeks before the wedding, I could understand panic. Imagine discovering that the family story you had repeated for 15 years did not match the papers in front of you. Imagine being weeks away from marrying someone who had heard that story from you for years. I could understand wanting the papers to disappear. What I could no longer explain away was what she had just done. She was 31 years old. The wedding was over. There were no guests waiting, no photographer, no dress, no mother-in-law standing in front of her, no clock counting down to a ceremony. I had handed her 3 factual questions in private and offered her a way to correct them without humiliation. She had chosen to write another version anyway. That was the second lie. And unlike the first one, it had no 16-year-old girl inside it. I did not respond to Lila immediately. Instead, I built the correction I had promised myself I would make. It was 4 pages, and most of that was white space. At the top I wrote, "I am sending this only because you were recently told that I staged the wedding confrontation and manipulated old records. I am correcting those claims. I am not asking you to take sides in my family." Then I separated everything into claims. Claim 1. Caroline inserted herself into the placement, and the parents did not ask her to care for Lila. Under that, I included the relevant excerpt from the relative care document showing Mom and Dad's agreement and Dad's new written statement confirming they asked me to help. I removed information about treatment that nobody needed to see. Claim 2. Lila did not understand before the wedding that our parents had signed the arrangement or that reunification was the goal. Under that, I included only the relevant section of the August group text, with unrelated family messages removed. Claim 3. Caroline staged the photo confrontation, after secretly giving Owen old documents. Under that, I wrote the simplest fact available. Owen found the file himself while searching for family photos final on the shared wedding iPad. Then I included the dated photographer correspondence showing Lila had changed the core family photo list the day after writing that she did not want me in those photos because of what she had just learned. I did not include the county fair picture. I did not include the private note Lila had written at 16. I did not include the cruelest things Mom had said. I did not include every page I possessed, simply because I possessed it. At the end, I wrote, I will answer direct factual questions about my own actions. I will not discuss Lila's private childhood experiences or my parents' treatment history. Then I sent it to 7 people. 7, not 200 wedding guests. Not social media. Not coworkers. Not anyone who might enjoy the scandal. 7 relatives who had contacted me after Mom or Lila told them I had staged the wedding incident. I also sent Owen a copy because his marriage was the place where the new lie was doing the most damage. Then I closed my laptop. The first response came from an aunt less than an hour later. I was told you sent Owen those documents before the wedding. I wrote, I did not. She answered, I see that now. I'm sorry I repeated it. That was enough. I did not ask her to call anyone else. I did not ask what Mom had said word for word. I did not use the apology as proof that I was winning. Another relative responded with, There are obviously 2 sides. I did not answer. There had always been 2 sides to how Lila experienced living with me. There were not 2 sides to who sent Owen the file. There were not 2 sides to the signatures. There were not 2 sides to the date on a message. I had finally learned I did not need every person to understand that distinction before I could go to sleep. Mom called the next afternoon. I let it ring once before answering. How dare you send private family documents around? I sent redacted excerpts relevant to claims you made about me. You humiliated your sister. No. I corrected what you told people. You sent her private messages. I sent the part where she discussed me with the same 2 people now denying what she knew. You have always wanted an audience. That almost made me smile. If I wanted an audience, Mom, 200 people were standing there at the wedding. She went silent. I continued before she could move the conversation somewhere else. I walked away. You came back with paperwork. Owen found the paperwork. You know what I mean. No, that's the problem. I'm done pretending vague accusations mean the same thing as facts. Mom's voice cracked. What do you want from us? For years, that question would have trapped me. I would have tried to design an answer that gave everyone a path back to normal. An apology? A family dinner? A private conversation? Some way to repair what was broken without anyone losing too much. This time I already knew. I wanted you to correct 3 things. And then what? Nothing. She did not understand. Nothing? You could have answered them honestly. I would have corrected the people who had already been given the false version, and I would have stopped. You expect me to believe that? I don't need you to. Mom accused me of setting them up. I said, I asked questions you already knew the answers to. You knew how we would answer. I hoped I didn't. She hung up on me. That night, Owen asked if he could come over. I almost said no because I did not want my home becoming the place where he processed his marriage. But he said he only needed 10 minutes. When he arrived, he looked worse than he had at the wedding. He had lost the stunned quality of someone discovering a contradiction and replaced it with something quieter. He sat across from me at the same table where I had sorted the old documents. I read everything you sent. I nodded. And I read Lila's response. You don't have to tell me what you're going to do. I know. He rubbed both hands over his face. I keep trying to find the point where I can understand it. I waited. I can understand 16. So can I. I can understand remembering you as controlling. Yes. I can even understand August. That surprised me enough that I looked at him more closely. He said, if she found those papers 8 weeks before the wedding and panicked, I could understand panic. Not lying forever. But panic? Yeah. I nodded slowly. He continued. She could have been afraid I'd think she lied to me. Afraid her parents had lied to her. Afraid the whole story she built her relationship with you around was wrong. That's what she told me. I could work with that. He looked down at his hands. That's the part I can't get past. I could work with someone who said, I found out I was wrong and I got scared. I already knew what came next. But you gave her another chance. Yes. No wedding. No guests. No pressure. Just 3 questions. Yes. And she wrote that she didn't understand the papers. I said nothing. Owen looked up at me. She understood them well enough to explain them to her parents. Yes. She wrote that the photos had nothing to do with what she found. Yes. She literally wrote the opposite in August. Yes. His face tightened. I asked her about that. I did not ask what she said. He told me anyway. She said you were manipulating language and that I was letting you destroy us. I looked down at the table. I'm sorry. Don't. He said it more sharply than I expected. I looked back up. Don't apologize for my marriage. I'm not apologizing for your marriage. I'm sorry you're hurting. He nodded. Then he said, She keeps saying you want me to leave her. I don't. I know. Owen, whatever you do next, do not do it because of me. He gave me a tired look. You still think that's what this is? I don't know what it is. I do. He leaned back. If this was only about what she did to you, I could tell myself it belongs to your family and stay out of it. I waited. But she did it again to me. The sentence sat there. He did not say Lila had pushed him out of a photograph. He meant something simpler and much worse. She had looked at a truth that threatened the version of herself she needed him to believe and chosen the version instead. What are you going to do? I finally asked. We're going to counseling. I nodded. And I'm staying somewhere else for a while. I did not ask where. He continued. I'm not filing anything tomorrow. I'm not making a decision because I'm angry. But I can't go home tonight and pretend this is about your childhood anymore. That sounds reasonable. He almost laughed. Of course you'd say that. I say annoying things when I'm tired. That one wasn't annoying. He stood to leave, then stopped near the door. Diane asked me something. What? She asked whether I would still believe Lila's explanation if I hadn't seen the first document myself. I thought about it. Would you? He did not answer immediately. No. I believed him. After he left, I stood in my kitchen looking at the empty chair across from me. I should have felt victorious. For years, my family had treated truth like something dangerous in my hands, as though the moment I could prove what happened, I would use it to destroy everyone who hurt me. Now I had the proof. I had sent the correction. Several people had apologized. Owen was leaving the house he shared with Lila. I did not feel like I had won anything. What I felt was relief. The difference mattered. Winning would have meant I needed Lila to lose. Relief meant I no longer needed to carry what happened next. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Dad. I told your mother I stand by what I wrote. I read the message twice. Then another one arrived. She says I chose you over the family. For 15 years, Dad had treated telling the truth as choosing sides. Apparently, Mom still did. I wrote back, You chose your own statement. He answered, I know. That was all. I put my phone down and went upstairs. The next morning, Lila called 6 times before 8. I did not answer any of them. On the 7th attempt, she left a voicemail. Her voice was furious and breaking at the same time. You got what you wanted. Owen left last night. I hope you're happy. I listened once. Then I deleted it. For the first time since the wedding, I did not feel the urge to call her back and explain what had really happened. Owen leaving was not a fact I needed to correct. It was a consequence she was going to have to understand without me. By the end of the first month of counseling, Owen had stopped asking me questions about the old documents. That was how I knew the problem between him and Lila had finally moved somewhere I did not belong. He called once every couple of weeks, usually to let me know he was still living separately and that I did not need to worry if Mom or Lila tried to blame me for it. I never asked what happened in their sessions. Months later, he told me only what he was comfortable sharing. Every time the counselor asked Lila what she had chosen after finding the records, she moved backward into what I had done when she was 16. My rules, my curfews, my reading her messages, the things I had admitted without argument. Owen said the counselor kept bringing the question back to the same point. Nobody is asking whether Caroline hurt you. We're asking what you chose after you learned the story you had been telling was incomplete. According to Owen, Lila could talk for an hour about the first question and barely a minute about the second. I understood why. The past gave Lila somewhere to hide because the past was complicated. She could honestly say I had invaded her privacy. She could honestly say I had been rigid and sometimes controlling. She could honestly say that living with me during our parents' treatment had been one of the hardest periods of her life. Every one of those truths deserved space. What they could not do was answer why, at 31, she had found records proving our parents requested the placement, understood that reunification had always been the goal, removed me from her core family photos, married Owen without correcting what she had told him, and then denied in writing that she understood any of it. The counselor apparently did not let those timelines blur together. Neither did Owen anymore. Mom did not appreciate that distinction. She called me one afternoon in November and started the conversation by saying, "I hope you understand Owen is punishing your sister for something that happened when she was a child." I was working from home and had a report open on my laptop, so I put her on speaker and kept my hands away from the keyboard. "Owen's decisions are between Owen and Lila," I said. Mom insisted that was exactly the attitude making everything worse. She said Lila had panicked because the wedding was close, that finding the papers had brought back trauma, and that anyone with compassion would understand she had not been thinking clearly. I told Mom she was free to believe that. Then, she got to the real reason for the call. "I need you to tell him that." "No, Caroline, please listen." "I am listening. You know Lila. You know how she gets when she feels cornered. If you told Owen she panicked, he might understand that this wasn't some calculated betrayal." I looked at the stack of documents beside my desk, now clipped together and untouched for several weeks. "I don't know that she panicked. Of course she did. Then she can tell him. He doesn't trust anything she says right now. That's not something I can fix." Mom's voice tightened. "You could at least tell him she wasn't trying to destroy her marriage." "I don't know what she was trying to do. You know what I mean." "I do, and I'm not going to translate her choices into something easier for him to hear." There was a long silence. Mom told me I was being cold. I told her I was finally refusing a job nobody had asked whether I wanted. For 15 years, I had been expected to absorb Lila's anger because I was stronger. Excuse Mom because she had been recovering. Excuse Dad because he hated conflict. Explain everyone's behavior to everyone else. And then disappear whenever my presence made the family uncomfortable. Now Mom wanted me to repair a marriage I had never been part of by assigning Lila a motive that made her easier to forgive. I was not doing it. Thanksgiving arrived 3 weeks later. For most of my adult life, Thanksgiving had been one of those holidays I attended almost automatically. It did not matter whether I wanted to go. Mom cooked too much food, Dad complained about the football schedule, relatives arrived carrying desserts nobody needed, and every old tension was covered with enough gravy to make it through the afternoon. That year, when Dad texted asking what time I would arrive, I answered that I had other plans. He called immediately, because apparently a 40-year-old woman declining Thanksgiving at her parents' house still qualified as an emergency. "Are you going somewhere?" he asked. "Yes." "Where?" "Dinner with friends." There was a pause. "Your mother was expecting you." I didn't tell her I was coming. She assumed. That sounds like something she can adjust to. Dad asked whether this was punishment. I told him no. I simply did not want to spend a holiday in a house where everyone would be monitoring every sentence to see whether the family scandal was about to restart. He said Mom would take my absence personally. I reminded him that Mom was allowed to have feelings about my decision without those feelings becoming instructions for me. Thanksgiving with my friends was almost aggressively ordinary. Nobody asked me to explain the wedding. Nobody lowered their voice when Lila's name came up because her name did not come up at all. We ate too much, argued about whether the potatoes needed more salt, watched half of a football game and abandoned it for a terrible movie. I washed dishes beside a friend who complained about her dishwasher, making a noise that sounded like a dying lawn mower. That was the most dramatic problem I solved all day. I did not sit by a window imagining my family eating without me. I did not secretly hope Mom would call and beg me to come home. I realized sometime around dessert that what I had wanted was not a better family confrontation. I had wanted one day when I was not responsible for managing one. Dad texted that night. "We missed you," I answered. "Hope dinner was good." He sent back a picture of the table. Mom was smiling at one end. Lila sat beside her. There was an empty chair, nowhere in particular. And for once, I did not study the image, looking for where I should have been. I put my phone down and went back to helping clear plates. The alliance between Mom and Lila began cracking before Christmas. I did not witness the fight, and would never have known about it if Dad had not called me afterward. He started giving me a detailed account, and I stopped him before he got very far. "I don't want to play-by-play. Dad said I should know because my name had come up." I told him my name had come up in their arguments for 15 years and I had survived without transcripts. He was quiet, then asked if I at least wanted to know the part that mattered. I said he could tell me the broad outline. Mom had blamed Lila for pushing me out of the wedding photo. "If you hadn't made a scene in front of Diane, none of this would have happened," she told her. Lila apparently stared at her in disbelief and reminded her that Mom had been the one telling everyone the old records could not be allowed to disrupt the wedding. Mom answered that she had told Lila not to dredge up old history, not to lie to Owen. That was when Lila said, "You taught me how." Dad stopped talking after repeating that line. I could imagine the silence in the room, but I did not pretend I knew exactly how either woman looked or what they were thinking. What mattered was simpler. The same story that had kept them aligned for years had finally become too expensive to share. As long as blaming me protected both of them, they could agree. Once Owen left and relatives started asking questions, responsibility had to land somewhere. Mom wanted the disaster to begin with. Lila's behavior at the photos. Lila wanted it to begin with Mom teaching her which parts of the past were safe to say aloud. Neither wanted it to begin with her own choice. Dad offered to send me screenshots from a later text argument. "Don't. They mention you. I don't care. I thought you wanted proof. I wanted proof of claims being made about me. I don't need proof that they're angry with each other." He sounded surprised. I understood why. A year earlier, I might have collected every message, partly because I was afraid someone would eventually ask me to defend myself against another version. Now I knew something I had not known then. Evidence could protect me without becoming entertainment. I did not need to watch Mom and Lila injure each other to feel vindicated. By January, Owen had been living separately for months. Counseling had not ended, but the temporary arrangement stopped being temporary. He leased an apartment closer to work and moved the rest of his clothes out of the house he and Lila had shared. He told me after it was done, not before. "I'm telling you because I know she's going to say you pushed me into this," he said. I told him I did not need advance warning about every accusation anymore. He laughed tiredly and said he was beginning to understand why I had spent so many years walking away from family arguments. I asked only one question. "Are you doing this because you're still angry about the wedding?" "No." His answer was immediate. He told me he had stayed in counseling long enough to know anger was not the main problem. If Lila had eventually said, "I found the records, panicked, lied, and I'm ashamed," he believed they might have had something to rebuild. Instead, she continued framing every question about her choices as an attack engineered by me. When he asked why she had denied understanding the records after writing messages that proved she understood them, she said he was choosing my interpretation over hers. When he asked why she told relatives I had planted the files on their wedding tablet, she said she had only been trying to protect herself from me. The facts kept changing shape whenever accountability got close. "I don't know how to be married to somebody if every fact becomes negotiable when it hurts," Owen said. I told him I was sorry. He reminded me again not to apologize for his marriage. Then he said something I had not expected. "I also need you to know I don't think she's evil." "I don't either. She's scared." "I know. That doesn't make it okay." "No." For once, we did not need a longer conversation. Lila called me 3 days later. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something in me decided I was tired of conversations being carried to me through Mom, Dad, and Owen. I answered. "You wanted this," she said. There was no hello. "No? Don't lie to me." I'm not. You sent those records because you knew exactly what would happen. I sent corrections after you told people I staged the wedding confrontation. You knew Owen would leave. I knew what the truth was. What happened after that belonged to you." She laughed bitterly. "There it is. Saint Caroline. Just handing everybody facts and pretending you have nothing to do with the damage. I never said I had nothing to do with our history. You destroyed everything. No, you couldn't stand that I was happy. I felt the old instinct rise in me, the need to go point by point. I attended your wedding. I walked away from the photo. I did not give Owen the first document. I did not ask him to leave you. I had all the facts ready, and then I realized we had already had this conversation in 10 different forms. So I asked her one question. What would you have wanted me to do? She answered immediately. Stay out of my marriage. I did. You sent him everything. He was already asking because he found the first document himself. You could have told him it didn't matter, but it did. To you. To him. You could have told him I was confused. I don't know that you were. You know exactly what I went through. I know some of it. You could have told him I panicked. That's what Mom wanted me to say too. Because it's true. Then tell him. He doesn't believe me. I let the silence sit there. That was the part Lila could not tolerate. Not that I had refused to defend her, but that I no longer had the power she was accusing me of having. I could not make Owen trust her. I could not unsend her messages. I could not move the timestamp on the photographer's email. I could not return us all to the moment before she found the papers. You ruined my marriage, she said. The words came out quieter this time. I wasn't in your marriage, Lila. She inhaled sharply. You think that makes you innocent? No, I think it makes your marriage yours. I ended the call before it could become another hour of the same argument. My hands were shaking afterward, so I made tea and stood in my kitchen until they stopped. Boundaries sound elegant when people summarize them later. In the moment, they often feel like refusing to run back into a burning house because someone inside is screaming your name. Winter passed. Dad occasionally called. Mom rarely did. Lila did not contact me again. I returned to work, friends, errands, and ordinary weekends. The family did not collapse because I stepped away. It simply had to redistribute the weight I had been carrying, and nobody seemed to like where it landed. By spring, Owen called again. We had not spoken in several weeks. He told me counseling was over. I assumed he meant they were accepting the separation, so I said I hoped whatever came next was calmer for both of them. There's one more step, he said. I waited. I'm meeting with a lawyer next week. For the first time since the wedding, I did not feel surprised. I only felt the distance between a photograph my sister had tried to control and a consequence no photograph could hide. By spring, I had stopped measuring progress by whether my family apologized. Apologies were unpredictable, and in our family they often arrived wrapped in explanations so thick that by the time someone finished saying sorry, I was somehow responsible for comforting them. I measured progress differently now. Could I hear something false without spending the next 3 days preparing a defense? Could I leave a room without wondering who would rewrite my exit afterward? Could I let another adult make a bad decision without immediately trying to prevent the consequences? Those questions mattered more than whether Mom finally admitted what she had done. I tested that progress at a family gathering in April. I almost did not go, but Dad had asked me to stop by for an uncle's birthday, and I decided an hour of cake and polite conversation was not the same thing as reopening the entire family system. I arrived in my own car, told Dad I would not stay late, and kept my purse with me instead of setting it somewhere that made leaving feel like a production. For most of the afternoon, things were almost normal. Then one of my cousins mentioned how much work it was caring for her niece after school, and Mom gave a little laugh from across the room. Be careful, she said. Caroline started helping with her sister and nearly turned it into a full-time parenting job. She always did like playing mother. The room did not go silent dramatically. A few people looked at me. Dad stopped halfway through lifting his coffee. Mom smiled as though she had told an old family joke everyone understood. A year earlier, I would have challenged every word. I would have reminded her about the placement forms, the reunification plan, and the letter in her own handwriting, thanking me for doing what she could not. Instead, I looked at her and said, "We've already discussed this boundary." Mom rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Caroline. It was a joke. I told you if you repeated that story, I would leave." "You're going to walk out of a birthday because I made one harmless comment?" "No. I'm going to leave because I said what I would do if it happened again." She stared at me, waiting for the argument. I did not give her one. I picked up my purse, hugged my uncle, told Dad I would call him later, and walked out. Mom followed me as far as the front hallway, accusing me of being dramatic, unforgiving, and determined to punish her forever. I did not stop. The strangest part was that my hands were not even shaking when I reached my car. I had finally understood that a boundary did not require the other person to agree it was reasonable. It only required me to enforce it. A few weeks later, one of my aunts called. I assumed she wanted to talk about the birthday gathering, but she surprised me. "Your father corrected me yesterday," she said. I asked what she meant. She told me they had been talking about Lila and the divorce rumors, and she repeated something she had heard years ago about me taking Lila away from our parents. Dad stopped her and said, "No, we asked Caroline to take Lila. She did not take her from us." I sat quietly after she repeated the sentence. Dad had finally said it when I was not there to force the question. My aunt apologized for believing the other version for so long. I thanked her for calling and did not ask what else Dad had said. That evening, he called me himself. "I heard you spoke to your aunt," he said. I told him I had. He sounded almost embarrassed. "I should have said that 15 years ago." "Yes. I know saying it now doesn't fix anything." "No." He was quiet, then asked, "Is there anything I can do?" There had been a time when I would have handed him a list. "Call this person. Correct that story. Make Mom apologize. Tell Lila what really happened." I did not want to manage his redemption any more than I wanted to manage everyone else's mistakes. "You can't fix the 15 years, I said. You can decide what you do with the next one." Our relationship did not become close overnight. He did not transform into a courageous man because he corrected one relative. I still kept more distance than before, but a narrow door remained open, and for the first time, Dad seemed to understand that keeping it open depended on what he did when I was not in the room. In early summer, Owen called me after several weeks of silence. I was watering a plant on my balcony when I saw his name. By then, he and Lila had lived separately for months. Counseling had ended. I assumed he was calling to tell me they had decided whether to reconcile. He got to the point quickly. "I filed for divorce this morning." I sat down. He did not say they were divorced. He did not talk about court dates, property, or how long the process would take. He simply said he had filed. My first reaction surprised even me. "Don't do this because of what she did to me. I'm not Owen. I'm not Caroline." His voice was calm. He told me he had spent months asking himself whether their marriage could survive what happened. He had tried to separate Lila's childhood from her adult choices. He had tried to understand fear, shame, and panic. What he could not accept was the pattern that remained after every excuse was removed. When facts made Lila feel exposed, she changed the meaning of the facts. When he asked about the August messages, she blamed my interpretation. When he asked about the revised photo list, she said the pictures were unrelated to the documents despite her own written words. When he asked why she told relatives I had planted the paperwork, she said she was defending herself. "I'm not leaving her because she lied about you 15 years ago," he said. "I'm leaving because she did it again to me." I closed my eyes. He continued. "I can't be married to someone if the truth only counts when it doesn't make her ashamed." There was nothing useful for me to say to that. I told him I was sorry their marriage had reached that point. He reminded me that I was not responsible for fixing it. This time, I believed him. News of the filing moved through the family quickly, but I stayed out of it. Mom did not call me. Lila did not call me either. A few relatives did, mostly because they had begun revisiting things they had accepted without question for years. One cousin told me she had asked Lila directly whether our parents requested that I care for her. Lila first said the situation had been forced on everyone. Then later said, I had volunteered and taken over. My cousin sounded unsettled. The answer changes depending on what I ask, she said. I did not tell her Lila was a liar. I said, ask her about her own experience if you want to understand her. If you want to know who signed the placement, the records answer that. Another aunt apologized for joking years earlier that I had enjoyed being Lila's substitute mother. She admitted Mom had repeated that phrase so often that it eventually stopped sounding like an opinion. I accepted the apology and changed the subject. I did not need each relative to issue a formal correction. The important change was smaller and more damaging to the old family system. Lila and Mom were no longer automatically believed simply because they told the story first. Mom hated that. Dad told me once, without offering details, that she had become furious whenever someone asked a follow-up question. The old version had worked best when nobody checked it. Now people did. I told Dad I did not need updates. By late July, I thought the wedding photos had become irrelevant. Then a small, padded envelope arrived from Diane. Inside was a printed photograph and a short note. The picture had been taken before the ceremony. I remembered the moment only after looking at it for several seconds. Lila had been standing near a window while someone searched for a missing pin. One side of her veil had twisted against the fastening at the back of her hair. I stepped behind her and fixed it without thinking. The photographer must have caught us between poses. Lila was looking down. I was concentrating on the clasp. Neither of us knew a camera was pointed at us. On the back, Diane had written, Owen found this in the wedding gallery and sent it to me. Family usually looks more honest when nobody tells it where to stand. I sat at my kitchen table holding the photograph. For a moment, I felt the temptation to make it mean too much. I could have called it proof that Lila loved me. It was not. I could have called it proof that we had secretly been close. We had not been. I could have used it as evidence that the woman who pushed me out of a photograph hours later was a hypocrite. That would have been too simple, too. The picture showed one true moment. My sister needed help with her veil, and I helped her. Nobody assigned me a position. Nobody labeled the group immediate family or extended family. There was no list telling us where to stand. That was enough. I put the candid in a drawer. Not because I hated it, because I did not want the most complicated relationship of my life sitting on my mantle every morning demanding interpretation. The photograph I did put there had been taken earlier that summer at a friend's backyard dinner. There were 6 of us squeezed together badly because nobody knew how to use the timer on the phone. One person was blinking. I was laughing at something outside the frame. Nobody matched. Nobody posed correctly. Nobody had spent 15 years debating whether I qualified to stand there. I liked that picture better. At the beginning of August, only a few days before I started telling this story, Lila sent me a message. We had not spoken directly in months. Mom did it again, she wrote. This time I heard it. I knew exactly what she meant without asking. Mom had told another version of the past that moved responsibility somewhere more comfortable. My old instinct appeared immediately. Call Lila, ask what happened. Compare words, explain Mom. Help Lila understand why Mom did it, tell her how to respond. Turn the entire thing into a problem I could organize before anyone got hurt worse. I held the phone for a few seconds. Then I put it face down. I finished the coffee I had been making. I answered an email. I took a shower and left the apartment to meet a friend. Lila's message was still there when I came home. I had not blocked her. I had not decided never to speak to her again. Maybe I would answer the next day. Maybe the week after that. Maybe there would eventually be a conversation where we could talk, without making one person's pain erase another person's responsibility. But it was no longer my emergency, just because someone in my family had created it. 10 months earlier, my sister had pushed me out of a photograph and told me the space beside my own parents was for family only. At the time, I thought the cruelty was being told where I did not belong. I understand it differently now. For years, I had let other people decide my place by deciding what I was responsible for. Mom's shame became mine to absorb. Dad's silence became mine to excuse. Lila's anger became mine to explain. Even when I walked away, I kept carrying the argument with me. I do not anymore. The old photograph from Diane is still in my drawer. The other one is still on my shelf. I do not need either of them to prove who my family is. And when Lila's name lights up my phone now, I know something I did not know when I was 24. I can love someone, remember what they survived, admit where I hurt them, and still refuse to carry the consequences of the choices they make as adults. For the first time in my life, a family crisis can wait until I decide whether it deserves my time. You can admit where you were wrong without accepting blame for things you never did. When someone keeps rewriting the truth, set clear boundaries, keep your evidence, and stop protecting them from consequences. Choose relationships built on honesty, not guilt. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more family dramas.